Chapter 40. The world stopped feeling real either minutes or hours ago. Izuku can't be sure. He can't be sure of a lot of things, where he is, what time it is, whether or not is really all that safe. The wave is coming. He can feel his mind turning somersaults in his head, a surefire sign that all the pressure and sickening terror, everything he has spent the past 3 days pushing back, is about to come crashing in at last. This may be the longest he's ever delayed it, and so much has happened within that time. He's going to drown. But that's okay. It's okay because he's holding onto someone's hand, and as long as he doesn't let go, he can always follow it back to the surface. There are people talking, but it feels as if his ears are stuffed with cotton. He can hear words, but he can't pick them apart to understand them. Blackness creeps in from all sides, but he can just make out lights. Uniforms. Police and paramedics, he realizes distantly. The warm hand tightens around his, and he squeezes back. People hold things tighter when they're afraid they might lose them. Someone speaks, and the voice is familiar. Ida. Ida's here. Ida never left. The hand grips his, the wave towers over him, and he braces himself to drown. The hand loosens and lets go. In a panic, Izuku finds himself floundering, scrambling away from the encroaching wave as it moves in. He reaches back, frantic. It comes back, only this time it rests on his right shoulder, so warm it's nearly hot through his shirt. A colder hand comes to his left arm, avoiding the burn. Todoroki. Todoroki's here but is leaving. Why is he leaving? Words come into focus. Midoriya. You have to go with them. Izuku chokes. The hand squeezes his arms gently. Listen. I don't like it either, but they'll take care of you. It's safe. It's over now. Don't leave, he tries to say, but his mouth won't obey. The hands move again, from his arms to the sides of his face, and suddenly Todoroki's forehead is against his, and his eyes are close enough that Izuku can see them even through the tunnel vision. I'll be back as soon as I can. I promise. And then there are uniformed bodies between them, and Izuku stumbles and flounders along, and once again he can't afford to drown just yet. He presses back against the wall of the ambulance, wide-eyed and fighting against the tunnel vision. He can't hide. He can't drown. He can't go blind. He can't afford to do any of those things, not when he's alone like this, not when his living friends are gone and the only company he has are the paramedics treating his shoulder and... Ray. Ray's still here. At least that's something. Shouder isn't entirely sure where his suit is at the moment, and is even less sure that it's all in one place. He vaguely remembers throwing the jacket in Sekiguru's general direction after the press conference ended. With the knowledge that the rescue raids were taking place, he'd felt simultaneously strangled and exposed without his gear on. But now, with his jumpsuit on and the weight of his capture weapon settled around his shoulders, he feels more like a pro hero again, and less like a trained monkey dolled up for the crowds to stare at. In the end, there's neither room nor time for him to join in the battle or rescue operations. He knew there wouldn't be. There's too much distance between him and the 2 locations in Yokohama. He sees the news broadcast, though. He doubts there's a living soul in Japan who doesn't. Cleanup is still underway by the time he reaches the site of All Might's last stand. A team of pros headed by Endeavor has already cleared up the Numu at the other location. And while Shouder knows that the part he played was necessary, he can't help but feel extraneous. Like an extra piece, tossed to the side and taking up space. Sensei. He startles at the familiar voice, though he doesn't show it. Yaoirozu is here. What is Yaoirozu doing here, dressed to blend in with the crowd, approaching him with clear trepidation? I didn't engage with any villains, she says quickly, as if reading the look on his face. I just are here. Midoriya said to give you these. I don't know what they are. She pushes 4 small external drives into his hands and hurries away. Before he can pursue her to question her further, a text from Tsukochi directs him to a hospital in Kamino Ward. As much as he hates to leave this be for now, he's needed elsewhere, so he pockets the drives and files away Yaoirozu's strange appearance for later. The hospital is not the one where All Might will be, that one's kept under wraps for security's sake. But Shouder isn't there for All Might. He finds Bakugo first. The reason for this is that Bakugo isn't in a hospital room. He's sitting with an officer, stone-faced but not scowling, and looks to be quietly and tersely answering questions. There's gauze over his collarbone, but otherwise he looks unhurt. His hands are shaking. The officer does a double take as Shouder approaches. "Ah, a razorhead. We're just debriefing, it'll just be a few more minutes." A few more minutes for this session, Shouder knows. They'll only do basic surface-level stuff for now and come back for more in-depth questions once Bakudu's had time to recover. He locks eyes with his student for a moment. Bakudu can only meet his eyes for a few seconds before looking away. "All right?" Shouder asks. Bakudu winces, but nods. Shouder doesn't blame him. This is the gentlest he's ever spoken to Bakudu before. "I'm glad," he says. "I'll be back when I've checked on Midoriya." He steps away. "Sensei." He looks back just in time to see Bakudu look away again, lowering his eyes to his lap. "I used my quirk on him," he says shortly, and Shouder's heart leaps up into his throat. "It was complicated and I didn't want to, and he told me to, but the point is I did it." He pauses, throat bobbing as he swallows. "That's all." Shouder frowns. He's not sure what that means. Something tells him he won't be sure until he has the chance to talk to Midoriya. "Thank you for telling me," he says after a moment. "We'll talk more later." He doesn't have to ask around for where his remaining student is because another officer intercepts him. This one he recognizes, it's Tamikawa, one of Tsukochi's closest colleagues. "A little outside your jurisdiction, isn't it?" Shouder asks. "A little." Tamikawa's ears flick backward. "But I was called in ahead of time, given my familiarity with your students. And on that note, I could use your help." Shouder's eyes narrow. Is something wrong with Midoriya? Tamikawa starts leading him further down the hall. "He's in considerably worse shape than your other student. Nothing overtly serious, but he'll be staying overnight for treatment. But that's not the problem is that he's awake, but not very responsive." "Catatonic?" Shouder asks. "Not exactly." The officer leads him into a smaller hospital room, empty except for its single occupant and a nurse checking his vitals. The boy leans away from her, as far back as he can while still submitting to treatment, and watches the nurse as if he half expects her to sprout fangs and spit poison. His face is empty of expression, but his eyes are constantly on the move, roving from the nurse to the window to the doorway. As soon as the nurse steps back, he presses back as far as the bed will allow, grips handfuls of the hospital blanket, and continues watching the window and the door. Checking for threats, Shouder notes absently. And keeping an eye on escape routes. The nurse looks as if she'd like to protest, but she sees the look on Shouder's face and reluctantly backs off. Shouder steps forward with a quiet sigh. "Midoriya." His student zeroes in on him in an instant, as if just noticing him, and Shouder spends a moment assessing what he sees. Tamikawa was right, he's considerably worse off than Bakugo. Bruises muddle his body, standing out sickly purple and green on his face in particular. His left shoulder is bandaged, his hand is splintered, and his arm hangs in a sling. Shouder brushes him accidentally as he moves to sit by him, and his student twitches as if shocked. Shouder is careful to sit on the side opposite the injured arm, careful not to think about the fact that the last time he spoke to Midoriya, the last time he touched Midoriya, was 3 nights ago when he reset that arm. "I guess I can't fault your honesty," Shouder says. "You said you'd see me once everyone was safe, and you've technically kept your word." Midoriya's right hand still clutches the sheets, white-knuckled and shaking, until he lets go and transfers the vice-like grip to Shouder's arm. Hollow green eyes meet his, and Midoriya may not be making a sound, but Shouder knows a plea for help when he sees one. His student looks away again, to the doorway. "Midoriya." He shifts his arm, starts to pry Midoriya's hand loose, but stops when he sees the spike of panic it causes. So instead, he coils his hand over Midoriya's grasping fingers until his student is looking at him again, the way a drowning man looks at a life preserver. "It's over. You're safe." Midoriya breathes in, wheezing a little, and shakes his head as if to clear it. He lets go of Shouder's arm to squeeze his hand instead. There's no one he need to protect, Shouder tells him, and the dam breaks. It's probably hours overdue. For all Shouder knows, it's 3 days overdue. It would not surprise him in the least if Midoriya has spent his captivity suppressing a breakdown. It's eerie, for all that it's not Shouder's first panic attack. The problem is how quiet it is. Even the wheezing breaths are muffled, and tears strain down his student's face with no accompanying sobs. Shouder keeps talking, quiet and calm, as Midoriya falls apart and squeezes his hand numb. It's only when his breathing has evened out, though the tears haven't stopped, that Midoriya shifts, and suddenly his head is pressed to Shouder's chest. This isn't his area. He's never been touchy-feely, not with students nor with civilian victims, not even with friends, really. He's Midoriya's teacher, not his mother. Unfortunately, his mother isn't here at the moment. She won't be here for a couple hours. Shouder ignores Tamikawa, ignores his own misgivings, and wraps his arms around his student's trembling shoulders until the panic finally runs out. It is not over quickly. By the time it is, Midoriya has exhausted himself so thoroughly that he falls asleep against Shouder. Shortly after that, the nurse returns, helps Shouder extricate himself, and makes Midoriya as comfortable as a hospital mattress will allow. Shouder stands up, feeling far more tired than he has any right to, considering that he hasn't faced a single villain tonight. The nurse shoos both him and Tamikawa out. "Sorry," he says. "You probably wanted to debrief in." "The boy's well-being comes first," Tamikawa says with a shrug. "It can't be helped, and besides, we aren't going anywhere. Everything life or death urgent has already passed." Shouder nods and goes to check on Bakugo again. He has a hospital room to himself as well, though he's awake and alert and still dressed in his own clothes. "Where's Deku?" he asks the moment he sees Shouder walks in. "Asleep," he replies. "Injured, but not badly." He pauses. His shoulder was bandaged. Bakugo looks away. "I didn't want to," he says. He yelled at me until I did it anyway." "Why?" Shouder's careful not to make it sound like an accusation. He had some kind of plan. "I dunno." Bakugo shrugs roughly. "He played nice. Got them all thinking he was on their side, and they bought it. Then he helped spring me and told me to burn his shoulder. Figured he wanted to make it extra convincing. I don't know why. He didn't tell me, and there wasn't time to drag it out of him." Shouder sighs harshly. Bakugo is aggressive and rude, but not a liar. And besides, it would explain quite a lot. If Midoriya has spent the past few days playing dangerous games with villains, then no wonder he looks so battered and exhausted. It might explain the dries that Yaoyorozu thrust at him as well. "It'll come out when he has the chance to explain himself," Shouder says. "They'll probably have more questions for you later, but for now, they'll be sending you home tonight." Bakugo nods mutely. "I'm sorry for not preventing this," Shouder goes on. "And I'm glad our mistakes didn't cost you more than they already have. It's good that you're safe." His student fidgets and won't look at him. "Whatever," he mutters, but he sounds more embarrassed than anything else. Shouder makes his way to the front to wait for Tsukochi to arrive. It's awkward to discuss important things over text, but as far as Shouder knows, Tsukochi is still wrapping things up with Endeavor and the horde of captured Nume. He hates the waiting. It feels as if this entire ordeal has been nothing but waiting, and Shouder has been denied the physical release of a proper fight. It's as if he's been on claiming duty the whole time, first damage control with the school and the parents and the media, and now he's left to help sweep up the mess in the aftermath. When Shouder steps out to the front lobby of the hospital, he bites his tongue and curses his poor luck and troublesome students that keep showing up where they shouldn't be. Standing at the front desk are Todoroki Shoudo and Uraraka Ochika, faced with an overtired receptionist who looks as if she'd rather be anywhere else. Shouder can relate. "Don't need to see him or anything, we just want to know how he's doing," he hears Uraraka argue. "Seeing him would be nice," Todoroki bites out. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out that." The receptionist catches sight of Shouder approaching, and her eyes flash with a silent plea for help. His students see her attention shift, and both of them look over their shoulders and freeze at the sight of him. "It's been a long night. It's only going to get longer. Shouder doesn't need this. What do you two think you're doing here?" Uraraka at least has the grace to look apologetic. Todoroki meets his gaze with sullen defiance. "Where's Midoriya?" "Resting." Do I even want to know how you two knew to come here in the first place? Todoroki blinks and his face twitches but gives nothing away. Uraraka is a little worse at hiding her guilt. For a moment, Shouder's memory takes him back a short while ago when Yararozu thrust a handful of external drives at him, jostling his arms and brushing at his sleeves. He'd been distracted, of course, but now, in hindsight. It takes a bit of searching, but Shouder finds the tiny tracking chip caught in the fabric of his sleeve. It was deftly placed. Under different circumstances, Shouder might have been proud of Yararozu's quick hands. He looks at the chip, then at his two students. That was my idea. Sensei, it's not Momo's fault, I told her to. Stop, he cuts them off. They fall silent and Shouder takes a second look at them. They look scruffy, dirty and a little bruised. Far more dirty and bruised than they ought to have looked if they'd been standing at the sidelines. Shouder's heart sinks. That means broken rules, and broken rules mean a lot of difficult choices about consequences. By rights I should be calling your parents right now, at the very least. He's a little busy at the moment, Todoroki says flatly. I don't live at home, Uraraka adds. He sighs. Midoriya is resting right now, he says, and the two of them stand a little straighter. He's injured, but not seriously. I can't make them let you back there, but I can tell you that he's been treated. Bakugo's probably going to be out soon. Uraraka's already pulling out her phone, texting someone. Or texting everyone, for all he knows. The hospital doors slide open, and a flurry of running footsteps turn Shouder's head. The moment he sees who it is, he takes his students firmly by the shoulders and draws them to the side, away from the front desk. Mrs. Midoriya nearly trips and falls over the desk, wild-eyed and frantic. My son is here, she says. Midoriya Izuku. Where is he? Can I see him? She fumbles out her ID card at the receptionist's request. Evidently she has a much easier time of getting through than his students had. He's received treatment, but we'll be keeping him overnight just to be safe, the receptionist tells her. But in the meantime, you can go in and see him. Second floor, room 209. Actually, if Eraserhead is free, he can show you where. Mrs. Midoriya looks over and seems to notice him for the first time. Then her attention shifts to the teenagers standing with him. Shouder happens to glance at Uraraka just in time to see her meet Mrs. Midoriya's eyes. He doesn't recognize that look that they share, but it probably means they know something he doesn't know and should. Mrs. Midoriya turns back to the receptionist. Thank you very much. Those two are my son's friends. Could I take them back with me? We are currently only allowing family and law enforcement. I'm his mother, Mrs. Midoriya says in a tone that discourages argument. I understand that, but... You look as if you've had a long night, Mrs. Midoriya says. Well, yes, but... I've had a very long 3 days, she continues. And so have they. Would you like me to sign a waiver? Would that make it easier? The receptionist puts up a valiant fight, but Shouder knows a losing battle when he sees one. Mrs. Midoriya turns away with a gracious victory in hand and beckons to his two students. Come along, she says with a tired smile at them. It'll make him happy if you're there. Neither of them need to be told twice. As they join her, talking over each other's gratitude, Mrs. Midoriya brushes them off and turns her exhausted face to Shouder. Thank you, she says. For what you said. The press conference. It feels as if weeks have passed since then. Shouder nods to her mutely and Mrs. Midoriya takes his students and leaves. He shares a brief commiserating look with the harried receptionist and takes a seat to wait for Tsukochi. Izuku is cuffed to the chair again. But that's wrong, he knows. It's wrong and it's a cruel thing for his mind to do, so he thrashes and struggles until he claws his way back to wakefulness again, back to stiff hospital sheets and a white ceiling above and raised cold hands clutching his. But exhaustion won't leave him be without a fight. Again and again is pulled under, forced in dreams to return to the warehouse and the room and the thread of encroaching black sludge and all for one's poison words. He flounders and fights, clinging to consciousness like the edge of a cliff, but it crumbles in his sore, tired hands and he keeps falling. He stays asleep long enough for the dreams to take him further, the blackness comes, the swirling dark of a wrought gate that he falls through. The mask and the voice return to him, consuming the entire world of his nightmare until nothing exists within it but all for one's toxic presence. He tries to find Ray's hands again so that he has some way to pull himself back out, but he falls deeper and deeper until he can't tell which way is out anymore. And then pain breaks through. Ray's nails dig into his hand, nearly breaking skin until the sting brings him gasping into the waking world again. He can't see the white ceiling anymore, not through the tears. He lies awake, gasping for breath as he cries silently. And then there are arms around him, and Izuku is wrapped in warmth and softness and the smell of the shampoo his mother uses. "Izuku, I'm here. I'm here. You safe, I promise. It's okay. It's okay, I've got you." He clings to his mother as the tears fall away and clear his vision again. His face is pressed to her shoulder, and when he finally opens his bleary eyes, he sees that she didn't come alone. Uraraka and Todoroki are here, standing back to give his mother Ron. And with them, there's Ms. Marino and Mrs. Matsuda and Kurosawa from the apartment. There's Hino and even Miss Suzuki. There's Tensei. There's Nana. Nana sees him looking at her and smiles. "Hey, Munchkin. Toshi's at a different hospital, but is okay. He won, kiddo. We won." His mother finally pulls away and lets him sit back, then steps away and motions his friends forward. "Hey, Deko." Uraraka's voice shakes. "Ida, Momo, and Kirishima said hi. Momo did what you asked." Izuku's next breath trembles on the way in. There are things he wants to say, but he can't with his mother in the room, especially since he'd need her to translate anyway. "Your mom knew about what they did," Marino tells him, as if reading his mind. "I tried to tell her to stop them," Tensei says, looking shamefaced. "All things considered, I'm kind of glad she didn't." Izuku taps on the side of his bed to make sure Mom is looking. He looks to his two friends, lifts his trembling hands, and signs. He says, "Thank you for coming for me," Mom tells them. Todoroki gives him an odd look, and Izuku realizes with a jolt that he's never seen his friend look close to tears before. "Thought you were gonna yell at us," he says quietly. "I want her." Mom keeps translating for him. She smiles shakily at what he says next. "I'll do it later, when I'm less happy to see you." This startles a watery chuckle out of Uraraka, and she reaches over to squeeze his uninjured hand. The world goes blurry again. The next time he wakes up, he gets the feeling that more time has passed than before. He thinks this because Uraraka is gone and Mom is in her place, still holding his hand. She's dropped into a doze, but her hold is firm and warm. Consciousness slips from him again, and for once Izuku lets it. If the nightmares do come back, then she'll still be there when he wakes up. Shouda sits in for Midoriya's debriefing the next morning. Midoriya is dressed and sitting up. "I'm still fragile but otherwise in one piece." Once this is over, he'll be cleared to go home, and if Shouda has anything to say about it, this will be quick. He shouldn't have anything to worry about, not with Tsukochi handling things, but Shouda is both unable and unwilling to let go of the protective urges quietly seething within him. Tsukochi's first question is simple: "What happened after you were taken?" But Midoriya doesn't answer. The thing is, he tries. Shouda can see it. His mouth cracks open and his breath quickens a little, but no sound comes out. His uninjured right hand tightens into a fist, and a look of frustration darkens his face. Beside him, his mother keeps her hand on his shoulder. "He can sign," she says. "I can translate if you need." "That would be wonderful, thank you," Tsukochi tells her and offers Midoriya a smile. The boy looks uncertain for a moment, then starts answering. The story is a grim one. Midoriya and Bakugo were kept together, physically restrained and under constant surveillance, for 3 days straight. They made an unsuccessful joint escape attempt on the first day, which falls in line with what Bakugo said. Most disturbingly, the League's leader, All for One, took an interest in Midoriya for his quirk and its similarity to All Might, and made a concerted effort to manipulate him to the villain's side. And Midoriya, to Shouda's retroactive horror, tried his hand at manipulating right back. Midoriya's face is stone-blank and exhausted as he describes his attempt to free Ragdoll and its subsequent failure. He can't describe the theft of her quirk without stopping and shaking his head. "It's all right," Tsukochi tells him. "And she's okay." She was rescued from the facility, unconscious at the time, but I hear she woke up this morning. Midoriya sits a little straighter at this, eyes wide. I was wondering, though, about these. He produces an evidence bag containing the dries that Yororozu had given Shouder the previous night. Can you tell me what these are, Midoriya? And how you got them? Midoriya's face goes dark. His mother stumbles several times as she translates his answer. So let me get this straight, Shouder says quietly, once Midoriya has finished his story. You played nice with the League of Villains and lied to the face of the most dangerous criminal to ever exist in this country and got away with their electronic files. Midoriya stares at his lap and nods. He looks up again at Sikochi's voice. Midoriya, I have one more question for you, at least for now. He pauses. When searching the remains of the facility, we came across a body. Dental records came back, identifying him as Dr. Tsubasa Kento. There's a sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Midoriya, and her son stiffens. We looked into his background and found that he used to be a patient of his years ago. Do you know anything about him or why he was there? There's no hesitation. He answers sharply and jerkily, and his face is still angled downward, but Shouder can see the pain on his face. Any pity he might have had for the dead man evaporates when he finds out what he did. It's my fault he's dead, Midoriya tells them. I cuffed him to a desk. I wanted to keep him from leaving so he could be arrested. I didn't know All for One was going to blow up the building. Midoriya Inko's voice breaks as she translates, and she stops to embrace her son. Will there be legal consequences, she asks, her voice muffled. Doubtful, Sikochi replies. My quirk lets me detect lies, and yes, it does work with signed languages, and your son has been nothing but truthful so far. He pauses, noting something down. It would be very difficult to pin blame on either your son or Bakudo-kun for any distraction or injury they caused to villains during their imprisonment. For one thing, the combat authorization that Eraserhead gave them was never retracted. For another, All for One himself is far easier to find guilty. He's not exactly in a position to defend his innocence at the moment. We'll go through the proper channels. I don't doubt you'll have a great deal of support behind you after everything that's happened. Her relief is palpable. Midoriya's face crumples and he simply nods. The interview ends shortly after that. Sikochi leaves, but Midoriya intercepts Shouder before he can follow suit. Once his student has his attention, he signs again. This time, it's simple enough for Shouder to understand without a need for translation. All Might was taken to a different hospital, he answers. As far as I know, he's still being treated, but he'll be fine. That he'll be able to return to hero work is highly unlikely, but that can be left until later. Midoriya deserves to think about himself for a while. Except Midoriya. His student looks up at his voice. That burn on your shoulder. Bakudo told me you asked him to do that to you. Mrs. Midoriya suppresses a sharp gasp. Izuku, why would? Is this true? Shouder asks. Midoriya nods. He keeps his signs simple when he answers, fingerspelling more words than he probably would normally. All for One had enough quirks to bring us both back if we ran. I stayed to stall them because they thought they were turning me to their side. I told him to burn me so it'd be more convincing. Shouder sighs heavily. It worked, Midoriya says. We'll talk more about that later, Shouder says at length. For now, go home. It's safe, then. Mrs. Midoriya asks. Police and underground heroes will have eyes on your home around the clock, he answers. But after a loss like this, I doubt you'll have anything to worry about from the League for a while. That seems to soothe things, at least a little. Shouder leaves them with a polite nod and a single hospital room number and moves on. There are other matters that need attention. His students showing up in places they shouldn't, for example. Izuku doesn't bother looking at his messages. They are all from the night of the attack on the camp, and he isn't ready to read messages asking him if he was okay at a time when he wasn't and wouldn't be for another 3 days. There's one recent call to All Might's number from a couple of days ago, and he makes a note to ask Mom about that later. As they make their way through the hospital, Izuku steals a glance at her. She hasn't said much since they left Aizawa-sensei. Mostly she's just looked thoughtful. On his other side, Ray hasn't said much either. The other ghosts have gone back, but Ray is still here, following him like a silent little shadow. Her hair hides her face, and Izuku can't guess what she's thinking or feeling. He hasn't heard her voice again since last night. He hasn't even heard the old noises she used to make instead of talking. His mother seems to steal herself. Izuku, she says quietly. There's something I need to tell you later. And some conversations we need to have. I'm not upset with you, she says quickly and gives his hand a quick squeeze. I'm very, very happy you're all right. I'm proud of you. You've been so brave. But we do need to talk about this later. All right. This brings a nervous flutter to Izuku's stomach, but nothing more than that. He gives her a weak smile and nods. In fact, you may be the one who's upset with me, Mom continues, but falls silent when Izuku jerks to a stop. He does that because of the hand that catches hold of the hem of his jacket, curling into a small fist until he turns to see who it is. Kuda stares up at him with wide, wandering eyes. Izuku barely notices Mandalay a few steps behind, barely notes that this is the first time he's seen her dressed like a civilian, barely sees Mr. and Mrs. Azumi close by like they always are. He turns around, bending down to reach Kuda's eye level, and the boy throws his arms around his neck and holds tight. You back. Kuda's voice is muffled against his good shoulder, while Izuku fumbles to return the embrace with one arm. Why are you back, and you're alive then? He breaks off, choking on a pitched sob. You saved me. Even though I hit you and yelled at you, why you saved me and you made me laugh instead of getting scared and Tomoko says ET tried to save her too and Kuda, Mandalay says gently. Izuku shakes his head at her. I'm sorry, Kuda says. I'm sorry you got hurt because of me and they. Izuku pulls back and Kuda reluctantly lets go and scrubs at the tears on his face. Izuku looks up at Mom to make sure she's watching and signs. Mom smiles down at Kuda. He says you shouldn't apologize for things that aren't your fault. It's better to say thank you instead. Kuda puts on a wobbly brave face. Thank you, he says. He was up late watching when you were rescued, Mr. Azumi tells him. After he heard you were safe, he finally slept without any bad dreams. How come you're not talking? Kuda asks. Sometimes when I get scared enough, it scrambles my brain a little, Izuku explains, while his mother translates. I'll be okay in a little while, promise. Midoriya, Mandalay says cautiously. I know you probably want to go home as soon as you can, but Ragdoll's been asking after you. If it's not too much trouble, I think it might do her some good to see you. We were just on our way, Mom answers. Aizawa, a razor had pointed the way for us. We were getting stuff to drink, Kuda says, wiping his nose on his arm with the sort of brusqueness of someone who wants to pretend he hasn't just been crying. We are on our way back. Izuku grins back. Lead the way. The first thing he sees when he steps inside is Tyder. He's hard to miss and is still in his battered hero uniform. The next is Pixie Bob, half sitting, half leaning against the hospital bed as she talks quietly with its occupant. A small push from Mandalay urges him further into the room, and Ragdoll catches sight of him. Her eyes are red and puffy, like she's only just stopped crying recently, but she smiles when she sees him. Hi, kitten. The world goes blurry. It'll be a cold day in hell before Izuku ever runs dry of tears. He feels Pixie Bob push something into his hands as he walks unsteadily closer and glances down to see a pen and a piece of paper. He looks up, still teary-eyed, and the heroine gives him a comforting grin. Mandalay said you might need that. With shaking hands, he puts the paper on Ragdoll's tray and starts writing. I'm sore. His head tingles and Mandalay's soft voice speaks directly into his mind. Come on, now, Midoriya. What did you just tell Kuda not to do? Izuku dries a fresh wave of tears on his arm, scribbles out what he just wrote, and tries again. Thank you for saving me. Ragdoll laughs quietly, and it sounds all wrong. Laughter isn't supposed to sound that sad. I wouldn't go that far, she says. From what I heard, you did plenty of your own saving. He shakes his head vigorously. You gave me his weaknesses. His handwriting is terrible, but he wants to get this out as fast as he possibly can. Wasn't that much, Ragdoll says softly. Just a last-ditch effort so I wouldn't just leave you with nothing. He hesitates, hand shaking, teeth grinding, before writing again. When he took your quirk, it weakened him. It was like he told me. He couldn't focus. He missed things that were right in front of him. You gave me his weaknesses before you even met him. Ragdoll laughs again, voice breaking. Good, she says, wiping her eyes. Good, I'm glad if it had to end, I could go out on a note like that. Izuku glares at her, flips the page over, and writes again. You'll always be a hero. She smiles and thanks him, still wiping her eyes, but he can tell she's only humoring him. He circles the always several times until the point of the pen almost digs through the paper entirely. Okay, I get the point. Ragdoll squeezes his shoulder. I'm glad you got out. I'm glad he didn't do the same to either of you. Because I've seen it, now. Just a little bit of what you're capable of. Her smile widens, taking up more and more of her face until it's almost what it used to be. Kitten, you're going to be amazing. Not 10 minutes later, Izuku steps outside of the hospital, looks up, and stops in his tracks yet again. The small courtyard out front is crowded with ghosts, yes, but also with the living. And among the strangers and passers-by going about their business, Izuku sees a cluster of faces he recognizes. Todoroki is the first face he sees, and then Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, and Yororozu, the group that came to Kamina to find them. And beyond them, it seems as if the rest of his class showed up, too. Even Bakudo is there, looking down and away as he sits squashed between Kaminari and Ashida. For a few moments he can only stare at them, wide-eyed. He draws in a breath to make one last fruitless effort to say something, even if it's just a bit no thank you. Before he or anyone else can make a sound, he sees Todoroki step forward, struggling a little with something in his arms. Mika lets out a high-pitched, trilling meow as Todoroki lets her down and keeps meowing as she trots up to Izuku, tail held high and curling. She circles his ankles a few times, then leaps from the ground to his arms. It's only when Izuku's holding her firmly that her meowing turns to a noisy purr. Something clicks in his mind as he holds Mika and watches his friends and classmates move in to greet him. It's only when it happens that he even realizes that it hadn't yet, until that point, that he has been walking around, living and functioning without quite internalizing the fact that it's over, that he is safe again and beyond the reach of any villains, and he can go home and eat real food and sleep in his bed and talk to his friends. They are all around him, warm and real and happy to see him, as Izuku hides his face in his cat's fur and breaks down sobbing. It feels a bit like this. He sees All Might coming and rushes to meet him in the middle. The feeling of something dragging at him stays, and it's enough to register in his mind as something outside of the ordinary, but it's not enough to hold him back. There's a blow coming, but it never lands. Instead, the world shifts abruptly, like a train breaking from its tracks, and suddenly the air is different. He can't see or hear. He can't feel. He stays like that for what feels like an eon compressed into a few scant minutes, and then the world returns to him. All Might does not. The blow never lands. Instead, he's sitting on a surface he doesn't recognize. It's not uncomfortable, far from it in fact, but not knowing exactly where he is and how he got there is quite uncomfortable enough. He reaches out with his senses, probing carefully, and finds himself in a fairly small room that smells of metal and sanitation and quietly fronts with whirring machinery. There is one other individual here with him, but there must be something wrong with his infrared vision, because he only knows that because he hears them moving and breathing. Beyond this room, he has no idea. He opens his mouth, ready to probe for information and gauge his situation, but his companion speaks before he has the chance. It's been so long. Would you believe me if I said I missed you? The voice is odd, awkward and halting, like a voice not often used. Or, more like, a voice whose owner does not know how it sounds. He's speechless for a moment, and then he sighs. This is quite an interesting trick, he says. I have to wonder how you found out about that, enough to replicate it, even. I look forward to learning. Soft, hoarse laughter answers him. Come on, Nai-san. Can we skip this part? I've been waiting a long time to talk to you again. I also have to wonder what you're trying to accomplish, he says. You see, he's dead. He's most likely been dead for longer than you've been alive, whoever you are. Of course I'm dead, is the reply. How else do you think we are talking right now? He ends the question with something else. Just one word. Just a name. It's then that his mind makes the switch, that he goes from patient skepticism to a simple understanding that this is real. There are quirks in existence that deal in minds and memories, capable of reaching into the deepest crevices of the psyche and dragging ugly, squirming things into light. Perhaps such a quirk might have falsified his younger brother's voice. But there is no quirk that could force his memory to resurrect his own name. I see, he says. He tries to use his quirks. Any of them, really. He cycles through them one by one, but they all seem so far beyond his reach. He says. It takes some getting used to, his brother tells him. I don't know if you'll get your sight back. I still can't hear. I can read your lips, though. Where are we? He asks. That's trusting of you, his brother says. You have no way of knowing whether I'm telling the truth. You always were endearingly honest. Such a pity, because you were clever, too. True. His brother laughs softly. We are in a secure facility, in the room where your body is being kept. Ah. That would explain the smell and the smallness of the place. Then we are still here. For now. His brother heaves a sigh. My line of successors have mostly moved on by now, but I stayed. Interesting. This had never occurred to him, the idea that there might be more to do after his death. Perhaps he can salvage the pieces of his legacy. Perhaps, in some small way, he can still guide Tamira from beyond the veil. Perhaps I'm not quite as finished as I first thought. Oh, no, his brother says. You definitely are. No matter which you choose, your path ends here. Annoyance pricks at him, sharper than it ever did when he was alive. Do you think that you have a say, just because I can hear your voice again? It's not about what I want, his brother answers. It's more about what the others want. This gives him pause. Others? Ni-san, his brother says patiently. What makes you think I'm the only one who's been waiting for you to die? For a moment, the small room seems just a bit colder than before. His senses are dulled in death, the quirks that sharpened them no longer answering his core. And yet, it seems as if the walls are creeping closer. Fear, he realizes distantly. He had forgotten what that felt like. The old stories are true, you know, his brother says. The more painful and violent the death, the more powerful the ghost. I see. With that drop of knowledge, the fear is beaten back. This is good news, then, considering the nature of my death. The room is quiet for a moment. Then, oh. His brother sounds surprised. Oh, you aren't dead yet. What? You aren't dead, his brother repeats. But you're never going to be alive again, I'm afraid. It wasn't All Might's blow that killed you, as it happens. The life support in your helmet malfunctioned at the last minute, shut down your brain functions. You're still on life support, technically, but you aren't going to wake up again. I see. There must be a way around this. Isn't there? Doesn't he always find a way? They'll be keeping you alive, his brother continues. You're a biological marvel, given the nature of your abilities. Apparently they believe there's still much to be learned from you. But eventually it'll run out, or their funding will run out, and they'll give you something that I'll bet you never thought you'd have. No. A peaceful death, his brother says. You'll die in your sleep, surrounded by family. Deaths like that never leave much of a ghost behind. And then what, he asks. What happens after that? That's where your choice comes in, his brother says. You can try to stay in this world. You can try to leave this room. You can meet all the souls who are waiting for you just outside. He doesn't need to breathe anymore, but it still hisses through his clenched teeth. I convinced them to stay there by promising to tell them the moment you finally died. But I'm not always honest, because that can very well be a lie if you choose the other option. He pauses. We can leave when you die. We don't have to go anywhere special to do it. We don't even have to leave this room to leave the world. Hands clasped one of his, cold and slender but strong. He tries to pull his hand back, but he doesn't try nearly as hard as he could. Come with me, his brother says. You've been here too long. And I know it's hard to be honest with yourself, especially for someone who lies so well as you do, but you know that this world isn't yours anymore. It hasn't been for a very long time. Come with me. Merciful, aren't you, he says. You spent a lifetime fighting against me, hating me and everything I stood for. And if you really have been waiting for me, then you've seen all the things I've done while you've been gone. Why would you try to help me now? Because this world isn't mine, either, his brother says. There is nothing for me here, nothing but you. I can't say whether or not you deserve what's waiting for you outside this room. I can't say whether or not it would help their pain to make you suffer. His voice catches and he pauses. But you're all I have left, Enai-san. We are all we have left. The hands release him. But, like I said, you aren't dead yet, and you won't be for a while yet, not until they are done with you. You have plenty of time to think about your choices and decide what you want and what you're willing to risk. His brother's voice sounds farther away, as if he's settling himself into a far corner to wait. Take your time, Enai-san. I can wait a little longer for you. Chapter 41. When he gets home, Izuku watches the news but cautiously. It's impossible to avoid if he so much as turns on the TV or glances at his phone, but Izuku gingerly dips his toe in, skims headlines as quickly as possible, and shuts off apps or changes the channel the moment things get to be too much. Ray sits and watches with him, and sometimes Ms. Marino and Mrs. Matsuda come in to check on them, and that helps. He sees recordings of the UA press conference and has another good cry when he sees what Aizawa-sensei said about him and Bakugo. And eventually, it all turns to All Might. Everyone's talking about All Might's condition and his retirement. At a certain point, it's all anyone will talk about. Izuku turns off the TV and puts away his phone and goes to find his mother. She's in the kitchen, wiping down counters that are already spotlessly clean. Izuku makes sure to step loudly enough to announce his presence, and she looks up with a strained smile. Are you hungry? She asks. It's a little early for lunch, but I could. You wanted to talk to me about something, he says. What was it? Her face falls. Izuku, you don't need to rush. You only just got home and you've been through so much. He doesn't answer, just watches her face until her voice trails off into a sigh. They sit across from each other at the kitchen table. Mon's hands are folded and she's looking at them instead of at him. The other day, she starts after almost a minute of thoughtful silence, then stops and starts again. Yesterday. It was yesterday. 2 of your friends came to visit, Araka and Ida. And, while they were here, well, Ray came home as well. Izuku looks at her. Ray curls up into an even smaller ball. She was upset. I think she just found you. Izuku nods, that about lines up with how his day went. And she made a bit of a fuss while your friends were here. Izuku's blood runs cold. How big of a fuss? He asks with shaking hands. Mon's mouth tightens and she answers, Izuku, I think they know. Izuku stares at the table. It was my fault, she says. I forgot about the pictures on the fridge, and I should have sent them out as soon as it started, but one of your ghosts warned me that they were going after you, and I knew I couldn't stop them, so She asked Ray to tell us what she knew. So, at least they wouldn't go in blind. I didn't explain things, and I didn't tell them about your quirk or how you have too, but they've seen something. And I could have stopped it, but I didn't. Her voice breaks. I'm sorry. I know you weren't ready for them to know, and I know you deserve to have a choice, but I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. Izuku doesn't have a panic attack. It's a close thing, but in the end he doesn't. The Todoroki household is explosively loud for a while, and then it is eerily quiet. It's cowardly, but Shadow spends the first period locked in his room, blasting music through his earbuds to drown out the sound of his father tearing apart the training room in a rage. He can't scrub the image from his memory of All Might standing half-withered and frail in full view of the world. The news is screaming about his impending retirement, ending his career on the highest of notes, the unchallenged #1 until the bitter end, burning up his last drop of power in a battle against a living nightmare. Unchallenged only because, at least from Endeavor's point of view, Shadow didn't have time to challenge him. And now, no matter how hard anyone fights, how strong they grow, All Might's record will remain unblemished. Shadow puts down his phone so that he won't give in to the temptation to hurl it across the room. He never cared about surpassing All Might, only about rubbing his success in his father's face, and then only about leaving his father behind entirely. All Might has never been a priority for him, at least not for his own sake. And his father was stupid anyway. Maybe he didn't expect to have to wait for a fourth child before he started, but he had to know that by the time any child of his became strong enough to challenge All Might, the latter would be past his prime and the victory would be worthless enough anyway. But now All Might is gone entirely when Shadow hasn't even finished 1 year at UA. Now everything Endeavor ever did will officially amount to nothing. Shadow paces his room, feeling caged, but now that the house is quiet, he can't quite summon the nerve to venture out and try to leave. But he wants something. It's irritating. There's something he wants, something he might even need, but the feeling is maddeningly vague. He's never been good with his own feelings. He's spent so long suppressing them that he's a novice at identifying them, and it makes times like this so much more frustrating. He keeps himself sane by texting Ida and Yara Rosa. It helps, even when they aren't physically present, it helps. He texts Midoriya as well, but does not expect a reply. Izuku's friends are giving him space. There was a bit of an explosion of messages after he got home, but he's replied to exactly none of them, and they seem to be taking the hint. Somehow he manages to gather the courage to check what Ida and Uraraka have sent. They don't mention what Mom says they saw, and he isn't sure whether or not to feel relieved. He's drowsing on the living room sofa, watching a nature show, when a new message comes in out of the blue. Checking it requires some careful maneuvering, because Mika is draped over his chest and the feeling of her purring is keeping the bad feelings back. 3:14 Todoroki. Is it strange that today feels quiet? The news is screaming non-stop, but it still feels quiet. Not sure whether it's good or bad. Izuku reads the message a few times. There's no way he can scrounge together a decent reply to something like that, written or spoken. He sees the little icon that indicates that Todoroki is writing another text and waits for it to arrive. But then the icon vanishes and no message comes through. Izuku isn't sure why that's what breaks through his silence. He doesn't write back because he has no idea what he can possibly say about any of this, especially since Todoroki probably has enough on his plate. How did Endeavor react to seeing All Might look like that? But that's not the end of the world. Thankfully, he already has a solution in place for when words fail him entirely. It can't really be called a selfie because his face doesn't make it into the picture. Instead, it shows him from chin to stomach, dressed in a rumpled All Might hoodie with his cat curled up on his chest. He sends it to Todoroki before he can think better of it. And then, because that's awfully unfair, he mass texts it to everyone in his contacts as well. A few replies roll in, but no one tries to drag him into a conversation or ask him questions. It's mostly hearts and smiley faces, though Kuda responds by mass texting a picture of himself covered in rabbits. But it dies down eventually, and things are quiet until the evening when another message surprises him. This one sends him running to his mother to show her. She takes one look at it, and at the silent pleading he knows must show on his face. She doesn't tell him no. She doesn't seem to want to tell him no, either. Izuku only realizes that he expected otherwise when she gives her consent and the relief it's in. Only a short while later he's breaking ahead of her as the sun sets over Dagoba, eyes fixed on the two figures standing on the beach. He has to slow up at the last minute because All Might is injured too, and he must be exhausted and in pain with his arm still broken and his injuries barely a day old. But All Might meets him halfway, and Izuku all but launches himself into his meta's arms and clings with all the strength he dares. Somehow they end up kneeling in the sand, and Izuku's voiceless gasping sobs are the most noise he's made since his rescue. I thought I'd lose you. All Might's voice is hoarse, and if Izuku didn't know better, he'd think he was about to cry, too. My boy, I thought. Izuku presses his head to All Might's uninjured shoulder and shakes his head furiously. That was a reckless thing you did, talking to him that way, All Might says. That was a foolish, dangerous thing, and I've never been more terrified than I was when I saw you in his reach. He is crying, Izuku realizes with a jolt. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry I wasn't there when they took you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I let him touch you before you were ready to face him. Izuku can't remember the last time he was pressed so close to All Might in his true form. He's been caught and scooped up, had his hair tousled and his stances corrected, but that was all before, when All Might could gather the power within him and make himself look like what he used to be. But now Izuku's arms are around All Might's rail-thin body, dangerously close to that twisted scar that took so much from him. All Might faced all for one like this. No tricks, no lies, no crocodile tears, in direct combat, blow for blow, All Might faced all for one with a fraction of his strength. And is still alive to hold Izuku so tightly that Izuku can almost count the ridge beneath his shirt. I wanted to scold you, All Might tells him. For taking such a risk when he was close enough to, he chokes on something, either a sob or the blood in his throat. But I don't know what he said to you. What he did. I'm sorry it took so long for me to come. I'm so sorry, my boy. Izuku shakes his head again, and frustration turns his tears scalding. He wishes he could answer without having to let go. But he can't, so he thrusts himself back, just enough that he has room to sign. It wasn't your fault. You came. I knew you'd come, and you did. I should have been with you from the start, All Might tells him. It was a mistake to assume you'd be safe. I made mistakes too, Izuku answers, pauses to wipe his eyes, and keeps going. I made so many mistakes, and I don't know if what I got was worth it because nothing ever felt right. No. All Might's hands settle against his arms. No. A lot has been lost and broken, and I don't know if it's more their fault or mine, but I know this. We are still here, Izuku. Izuku's next breath itches and shudders on the way in. You're still here, All Might continues. You've been so brave, my boy. Whatever mistakes you made, I know you've been brave and clever, because that's who you are. And in spite of everything, you made it through this without breaking yourself to pieces. You're still here, and you're going to heal, and that makes me so happy, my boy. His hands aren't enough to stem the tears. And I'm still here, too, All Might continues. I haven't been the best teacher. I can't seem to stop letting you down. I keep missing things that are important. But from now on, my only goal is you, do you understand? He pulls Izuku into another hug, gentler than before. I'll do my best. We both will. I'll make mistakes, but I promise I'll listen. However you need to tell me, I'll listen. Izuku has never wished more desperately for a voice than in that moment. Take your time. Nana's cool hand slides into his hair, a light and comforting touch as Izuku cries himself dry in All Might's arms. Whenever you're ready, kiddo. He isn't ready, though. He's not sure if he'll ever be ready. But maybe that's not a good excuse anymore. Izuku. Inko finds him sitting in front of the TV, a controller in hand as he works his way through a stack of his favorite games. He's been at this since last night, when they'd returned home from the beach and he had eventually fallen asleep in the middle of plane and revel. Mika is sitting in his lap, and there must be ghosts watching as well, because he isn't sitting centered in front of the screen. He pauses the game and looks up. Inko takes a deep breath. This will not be an easy conversation. Can we talk? It's about school. Izuku sets the controller aside and turns to face her fully. She sits beside him. I've been in contact with some of your teachers, she begins. Aizawa-sensei, mainly. And he's told me that there are changes coming to UA. And one of these changes is on-campus housing. Her son's eyes widen. After everything that's happened, and with All Might, they want to increase security, and in order to do that, they want to convert UA into a boarding school, I suppose. Izuku's eyes never leave her face, but he nods to show he's still listening. And I'm so torn, Izuku. The tears are coming already. Inko wipes at them, but knows it won't do much in the long run. Because I just have to wonder if UA is really the safest place for you, whatever changes they make. Her son breathes and sharply and lifts his hands to reply, but Inko shakes her head. I know this is your drain. I know that UA and being a hero, it's all you've ever wanted, and I don't want to stand in the way of what makes you happy. I never wanted that, but ever since this started, it's just been one thing after another, and I've come so close to losing you more times than I can count when one should be too many. She clasps his hands. Izuku, your happiness means everything to me, but your safety does too, and I don't know if UA can give you that. I don't know if All Might can give you that. With his hands in hers, she feels intense and spots a split-second spark of anger in his face before it vanishes. He shakes his head furiously and tugs his hands free. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't not his fault either, Inko whispers, and her son looks away with angry tears in his eyes. And that's why Anton, Izuku. Because this school is a target, and as your mother, I should pull you out. But I can't just do that, because of this thing with All Might and his power, and she breaks off, swallowing another explosive sob. Training to be a hero is one thing, Izuku. But doing this, being this, it's forced you to risk your life before you're ready, more than once, even more than your ghosts ever did. You were so happy when All Might gave you his quirk, and I was happy for you, but I didn't realize that it would put this kind of target on your back. I didn't realize that this would drag you into a war that had nothing to do with you. And I know you care about All Might, I know how much he means to you, but I can't help but be angry with him for involving you in this, without even. Her son's hands close tightly around hers, squeezing until she falls silent and looks him in the eye again. She expects to see anger, or even betrayal, but his face is calm as he holds up his hand. Wait here for a second. He gets up and leaves the living room, darting into the hall toward his bedroom. Inko takes the opportunity to compose herself, to dry her tears and take a few deep breaths so that her voice will stop shaking so much. She doesn't want to cry, but it's inevitable. If she pulls him out of school, then he may hate her, he may never forgive her, but is avoiding that worth his safety. He returns with papers in his hands. He sits back down, looks past her in that way of his that lets her know he's eyeing a ghost, and puts the papers down on the coffee table in front of them. One by one he lays them out, 4 pages in all, along with a small photograph and a little bag containing a lock of dark hair. He picks up the photograph and hands it to her. It's not a face that Inko recognizes, and yet it's familiar anyway. The subject is a little girl with black hair, looking shyly at the camera without smiling. She looks to be 8 or 9. She also looks remarkably like the figure that Izuku used to draw in markers and crayons from the age of 5 to the end of elementary school. Inko looks up, eyes wide, and finds her son watching her with weary understanding. I found this in the place where they kept us, he says. When Ray found me, she was afraid and I didn't know why. She led me to the room where these papers were. I think she found it because of her hair. They kept a piece of her after all this time. This, Inko whispers. That's Ray. Her name was Hitomi, but she doesn't like it when I call her that. She doesn't like to remember. I don't understand, what was this, why did they have this? Her eyes skim over the paper, not quite reading it word for word, but just enough to catch a phrase here and there. Her stomach turns. Izuku touches her hands again, making her look back at him. They tortured her, he says. And then when they were done, they killed her. She died, and 30 years later she found me, and she's been with me this whole time. His eyes bore into hers, begging her to understand. All Might didn't get me involved, Mum. I was already there when I was 5 and I first met her. I've been involved this whole time because of her. He stops to wipe his eyes as his own tears well up. I know you're scared. I am too. But I can't stop now, and it's because of her. And it's because of Kuda. Kuda, Inko echoes. That was that little boy in the hospital. The one whose aunt. I saved him, Izuku says, so vehemently that he mouths along with each sign. Me. There was nobody else there but ghosts, and I still saved him. I didn't run away and escape, I didn't wait for someone else to come help. A man tried to kill him, and I was the only one who could stop him, so that's what I did. Do you understand? She does. Heaven help her, she does. She remembers something he told her months ago, before all of this started, before the danger and fear began, when he'd cried in her arms and said, I can't save people's lives. All I can do is talk to them after they are already dead. This argument is dead in the water, she realizes as she fights back tears. She had lost it before it even started. I saved someone. Because I was there and I was strong enough. And Mom. He taps her insistently again until she finishes wiping her eyes and looks again. I'm only going to get stronger. She pulls him into a hug, and he clutches at her just as tightly. I know, she whispers, and it tears at her to admit it. I know you are, and I'm so proud, but I'm so scared, Izuku. He squeezes his arms tighter around her. They stay like that for a while, until Inko's pounding heartbeat eases and the fear edges back to a manageable level. Is she still here? She asks softly. Ray, I mean. She feels him shake his head against her. This is infuriating, she whispers. I want to be angry with that man. But I can't, because he isn't the one who hurt you, and he helped you find her. Even if he did it in a roundabout way, he pointed you in the right direction without even meaning to. A nod, this time. Inko pulls back. And I can't be angry with him, because when I asked, he was honest with me. Inko sniffles again, drying the last of her tears. He showed me that secret of his, the one you said you couldn't tell me. Though. I guess it doesn't matter, now. He must have trusted you, Izuku says. Millimeter, Inko lowers her eyes, thinking. She's done so much thinking, lately. He trusted you first, she says. Enough to tell you a truth like that. She sits back, frowning. Izuku watches her, but doesn't say anything else. Izuku. He tilts his head to the side. You brave. You've always been so brave, for the sake of others. So, shutting her eyes, she steels herself. So I can be brave too, for your sake. If you want to keep going to UA, then. I won't stand in your way. Even with her eyes closed, she can hear his sigh of relief. But I have one condition. And I don't think you're going to like it. When Inko opens her eyes, her son is looking at her with a weary sort of hope. She takes his hand, the scarred, crooked one, and clasps it warmly. Tell him. The wary hope shifts to alarm. It doesn't have to be now, she adds quickly. Or even soon. But before the year is out, at least. Because if you're going back, even after everything that's happened, then that means you seeing this through to the end. And that means that so is he. She squeezes his hand lightly until he squeezes back. I didn't speak to him for very long, but I could tell how much he cares about you. We almost lost him that night. And I know you, sweetheart. I know it would have broken you up inside for him to find out that way. He looks away, like he knows she's right. Go at your own pace. Don't force yourself to do it too quickly if it makes you feel unsafe. But tell him. He doesn't answer. But that also means he doesn't say no. That afternoon, Izuku is cuddling Mika and picking up patterns in his bedroom ceiling when Marino ducks in, grinning from ear to ear. Hate to bug you, Midoriya, but you're gonna want to come out and see this. A moment later, Mom opens the door and comes in. Izuku. You have some visitors. Something in the way she says that makes him look at her, confused. Her lips are pursed, but not like she's upset. She looks like she's trying not to smile. Before he can react, Mika springs to her feet and takes off like an arrow out his door. Mon tries to catch her as she passes, but Mika dodges around her and vanishes out into the hallway. A moment later, something barks. Izuku is off his bed and running out to the living room before either Marino or his mother can get another word out. He isn't sure what he expects, but what he finds are Ida and Uraraka standing by the sofa, with Tensei hovering nearby. Mika circles them excitedly, meowing and racing laps through the room. The reason for this is that Ida is carrying a dog. More to the point, it's a very familiar dog, in spite of a few notable differences. When Izuku last saw this dog, it had been painfully thin and filthy, with weeping eyes and swollen tick-covered ears. Now its eyes are bright, its ears are pricked, and its coat is snow-white and fluffy. It looks less like a dog than a small, panting cloud with a black nose and eyes. Izuku looks at Ida, eyes wide, and his friend gives a sheepish shrug. It was sort of my mother's idea, he says, clearing his throat. After Hoso, she thought it'd be good to take my mind off of things and that perhaps adopting an animal would help, and, well, I remembered. I probably should have asked before bringing her, he adds quickly. Considering you have a cat, but, her name is Belle. How are you feeling? Uraraka asks. Izuku opens his mouth to reply, hesitates, then runs back to retrieve his phone. Thank goodness for notebook apps. Mon leaves them to their own devices, and so do the apartment ghosts. Tensei sticks around, and Rei. He hasn't seen Rei around much. Not since his last talk with his mother. Izuku just hoped she isn't too upset with him. As soon as they gather on the couch together, Ida carefully deposits the dot in his lap, and Izuku is almost knocked backward by the ensuing faceful of kisses. Mika's a good sport about it, especially with Uraraka giving her attention while Ida apologizes profusely and tries to get his dot under control. Eventually she settles across Izuku's lap, while Izuku shakes with silent laughter and almost loses his grip on his phone in the process of petting her. You look a little better, Uraraka says brightly. Makes sense, since I've spent almost 2 whole days not being a hostage, Izuku answers with a wry grin. He sees Uraraka's smile sadden when she reads it, and tries not to wince as he takes his phone back and deletes the message. He'd meant to lighten the mood, but in hindsight, bringing back his own kidnapping probably wasn't the best way to go about it. He tries again. How is everyone? I've mostly had my phone on silent. Sorry. That is perfectly all right. Ida gestures forcefully, and Bell licks his hand when it sweeps within reach. It's perfectly reasonable for you to want time to yourself after everything that's happened. We just wanted, for the first time, Ida actually hesitates mid-sentence. He and Uraraka exchange a quick glance. We just wanted to check on you, Uraraka finishes. And bring you a fluffy dog. There's something in that look they shared, something that Izuku has never seen before. He's not sure if it's good or bad, but it's there, and it makes him look closer. Thank you, he says. It's been quiet. A better quiet. Peaceful quiet, not staring at death quiet. I didn't realize I missed people. This gets another sad smile from them, and Izuku is surprised when it frustrates him. He hides it by carding his fingers through the dog's fur. But to answer your question, everyone is fine, Ida replies. Izuku glances to Tensei and sees the ghost shifting uncomfortably. Tapping Ida's arm, Izuku holds up his next message. But Ida blinks at him. But what? What else is there? Izuku asks. What's wrong? It's nothing to do with you. Uraraka assures him. I mean, it's nothing that you have to worry about. Just focus on feeling better, okay? Izuku blinks at her, then turns his head and levels a stare at Tensei. He knows he's looking at what seems to be empty air to them, but it's not as if it's the first time he's stared at ghosts in front of people. And besides, if they notice anything weird about it this time, well. Ida's brother makes a valiant attempt at a poker face, but after a moment he sighs. There have been some calls from UA. Aizawa, mainly. He found out about your friend's little rescue mission, and well, he's always been a stickler for the rules. Izuku's stomach turns. And they won't admit it, but they are kind of worried about Todoroki, too, Tensei adds. He's been quiet lately. When Izuku looks at his friends again, he finds them following his gaze in vague confusion and sneaking glances around as well. And there's that look again. Like they are searching for something. Wondering. They know. Izuku isn't sure how much they've figured out, but it's far more than he ever wanted them to. And worst off, it happened while he was gone, so he doesn't know what they saw or heard. He pets Belle, grateful that she's calmed down. The weight in his lap is comforting. The conversation hobbles onward, stilted and awkward. They're all trying, all 3 of them, but there's only so much they can do when none of them really want to talk. Or at least, they don't want to talk like this, but talking like they used to is impossible after everything that's happened, and their only other option is to talk about the one thing he knows none of them know how to bring up. He knows they are trying. He's grateful for it. He's happier with them here than he would be without them. But is not sure if the distraction is worth the discomfort. I'm pretty much good on injuries, he types out when they ask after his shoulder. I just have to rest my left arm, that's all. But that's only for a couple of weeks at most. I'll be all right in time for school. I'm glad. Uraraka sounds visibly relieved. Are you getting enough rest? Ida asks. I know that troubling things can make it difficult to sleep peacefully. Izuku almost snorts at this. Don't I know it, he types. You're having trouble sleeping, then? Ida asks. Yeah, but that's nothing new. Uraraka hums sympathetically. Is there anything that might help? He shrugs. I don't know. Maybe death. Considering my luck lately, it's bound to happen eventually. In hindsight, he's not sure what made him think that was a good idea. He feels the weird looks they give him before he even sees them, so close to how his classmates looked when he joked dryly about drowning in the forest camp's outdoor bath. It frustrates him again. It shouldn't, because of course that would worry them. He could have died, for real, just 2 days ago. Ida's already lost someone he loved, and here he is making light of his own possible demise. Hastily Izuku erases the message and tries again. Or I could just knock myself out on the headboard or something. Unconsciousness probably counts as sleeping. He quickly deletes the part about hitting his head before he shows it to them. To his relief, this does get some grins and quiet laughter out of them. He'll take it. Still, it's sort of what drives him to the limit in the end. Izuku's back hits the back of couch, head tilted upward to stare at the ceiling. A short huff of a sigh escapes in. There's barely a sound to it, no voice at all, but he knows he can hear the frustration. I'm sorry, Deku, Uraraka says. We didn't mean to upset you. If you want. He waves at her to stop, already typing. The sour dread in his gut is only building up and twisting tightly into a knot, but for the first time in. He's 16 now. That makes it 9 years. For the first time in 9 years, he ignores the dread and pushes forward. I need to talk to you. I can't talk right now, but I don't know when I'll be able to talk again, and I want to get this over with instead of waiting forever. He looks at them again, makes sure they are paying attention. My mom told me what happened. You came while I was gone, and you saw and heard some weird things. Uraraka's breathing quickens. Ida goes still. I see ghosts. It's surprisingly easy to type it. With how long it's been and how much it still terrifies him, it ought to be harder than that. But it isn't. Maybe it's because they sort of already know, maybe it's because he's faced death and come out still breathing, but it feels like the simplest thing he's ever done. There's no answer. You can believe me or not, he continues. It doesn't really make a difference. The nice thing about facts is that they are true whether or not you believe them. Except it does make a difference. Whatever comes out of their mouths next, it's going to make a world of difference. I believe you, Uraraka tells him. After what I saw, it makes more sense than it doesn't. Somehow, Izuku musters up the courage to look at her. She's staring at her hands, fingers laced together. There's a little girl, she continues, and his heart skips a beat. Right? She's got dark hair, and she's dressed in a little dress. Or a nightshirt. It's a hospital gown, Izuku now knows. Her eyes are black. Uraraka's hands twist together. She was in your drawings. Wasn't she? Izuku tries to swallow, but his throat is closing. He nods. She led me to you, Uraraka says. Todoroki didn't see her, but I did. Only a couple times, for a split second. But she led me to the right hallway so we could find you. Izuku only realizes he's crying when his hands reach up on their own to wipe his eyes. I trust you, Ida says softly. It's harder to get a read on him, especially when crying makes his vision blurry. It may be hard to believe, but you aren't. I'll explain more when I can talk again, he tells them. I promise. But that's the important part. Ghosts are real and I can see them. They spend the rest of the visit playing with Ida's doll on the living room floor. Once Mika gets over her initial uncertainties, they get along wonderfully. When it gets late, Izuku is sorry to see them go. Midoriya, Ida turns back one last time before he leaves. He looks Izuku in the eye, holding his gaze, and for a few seconds they are in perfect harmony. Ida has a question, and Izuku knows exactly what that question is. He waits for Ida to ask it, and wonders how he can best answer. Ida hesitates again, throat bobbing. I'm glad that you're doing well. And thank you for trusting us. When they are gone, Izuku lies back on the couch and tries to settle his frayed nerves. He should think about this, he knows. He should think about what this means and what it will change and what else he might tell them. But his mind refuses to wrap itself around what just happened, no matter how hard he tries to make sense of it. He only expects to lie there for a while and contemplate, and so he's very surprised when he jumps awake in the middle of the night, heart pounding from a half-forgotten dream, with a blanket thrown over him and Mika curled up against his stomach. A knock at the door comes when Mom is out at the corner store, and Izuku is sitting cross-legged on the couch, game controller in hand. He pauses it and gets up, swallowing his unease, only to jump when Hino appears. Hey. His hair is still white, he hasn't reverted to his other appearance. That's just Shadow at the door, in case you were worried. Izuku nods gratefully and goes to let him in. Todoroki looks bad. Izuku knows he's probably not one to talk, but Todoroki always looks so put together, composed, and in control. Even during the sports festival, when he was struggling with himself, when he was trying to be an enemy before they figured out they could be friends instead, he didn't look quite this bad. He looked sad, but not run down. Right now, Todoroki looks like he hasn't slept much either. He opens his mouth to say something, but Izuku is already standing aside, offering wordless permission to come in. Sorry for intruding. Even his voice sounds rough and tired. Back in the living room, Izuku picks the controller back up and starts to scroll down to exit the game. He isn't prepared for this, for another afternoon of paper-thin brave faces and awkward, stilted conversation, but he can deal with it. He's missed Todoroki. He might be tired, but is still happy to see him, and that's worth the effort of dragging one side of a conversation out of himself. Todoroki stops him before he can start turning everything off. You don't have to, he says quickly. Like I said, I don't want to intrude. It's just... I don't, he stops. I don't know. You don't have to do anything for me. I just don't want to be home right now. Izuku's attention snaps back to him, and he finds himself scanning Todoroki for fresh injuries. When he finds no sign of any, his eyes flicker to Hino instead. Bastard hasn't touched him, if that's what you're worried about, the ghost tells him. Hasn't hardly looked at him, either. But he tore up his own training room the other day, and has been in a mood. Can't blame the kid. It ain't exactly a pleasant place to be. Izuku nods, scoots a little closer to Todoroki on the couch, and continues the game. And it's not bad. It's even a little easy. He half expects awkward, uncomfortable silence, but it's not, because he can tell that Todoroki's watching the screen and paying attention instead of sitting around bored. The combination of Todoroki's presence and Ori and the blind forest keep the stress and tension from stirring up. During a lull in the game's action, his phone vibrates. He checks it and finds a new text from Todoroki. Izuku glances at his friend, gets a non-committal shrug in return, and reads it. 12:18, Todoroki. You look awful. In spite of himself, Izuku snorts softly. 12:18 to me. You want to talk. He gets as far as the next place to make a safe point before his phone buzzes again. 12:22, Todoroki. I'm not the one who looks like he got hit by a train. This time, Izuku rolls his eyes before he answers, how sure are you about that? He snatches a quick look at Todoroki, just in time to see him roll his eyes. 12:23, Todoroki. Don't exaggerate. I got hit by a truck, at most. 12:23 in me. Well, I can't believe we are both fucking dead. 12:24, Todoroki. Such a tragedy. I'm sure we'll be missed. At some point, Izuku pauses the game again and turns his full attention to texting Todoroki while sitting so close he's almost leaning on him. It's ridiculous, it makes no sense, Todoroki's perfectly capable of talking, but somehow the absurdity makes it easier. 12:26 are me. This sucks. If I'm dead, then why am I still so tired? 12:27, Todoroki. Good question. Whoever said, I'll sleep when I'm dead, was an idiot. Anything I can do. 12:27 to me. Just chloroform me. Put me out of my misery. Todoroki purses his lips at this, and for a moment Izuku thinks he's gone too far again before his reply comes in. 12:27, Todoroki. That's hard to come by. I can find a big stick. Would that help? Izuku laughs. Well, almost. He certainly tries his best. His voice still won't obey him, but he manages a sharp, breathless wheezing that comes pretty close to the real thing. It's the most noise he's made recently outside of crying. And maybe that's what breaks through what little pretense he has left. It's not much, just a thin front over a writhing mass of not okay, but it's held up pretty well until now, and that's probably why his next message is a lot less of a jerk. I hate this. He looks at Todoroki's face, bracing himself for the inevitable mood-darkening worry, but his friend just watches him with a neutral expression, and he takes this as permission to continue. And once he does, it's hard to stop. I hate that I'm like this. I hate that All Might won and we escaped, but it's still not over, and sometimes I might as well still be there. I'm still scared and I can't sleep and I can't talk and I can't do anything without making everyone around me feel worse. He can't hurt me anymore, but is still doing it. Even when he's a vegetable, he's still screwing me over. Somewhere down the line, he blinks and realizes he's scowling through tears. I hate that all of you were stupid enough to go near that place, but I can't even be mad at you because I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. I'm so happy you came for me, and I also hate that you were there. The urge to throw his phone across the room comes and goes, and he puts it down instead and scrubs at his streaming eyes. Beside him, Todoroki is silent for a long time. And then Izuku's phone buzzes again. 12:35, Todoroki. I wish I'd been there with you, and I'm also glad I wasn't. I don't think it's supposed to make sense. Izuku's hand fumbles over another message. I'm sorry I broke your wrist. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was afraid they'd pull you in two, or the portal would close and you'd lose a hand. I wish I had. Todoroki's voice startles him, for all that it's low and quiet. Izuku jerks his head around, eyes still damp and watering. That would have been better. Would have been comforting. At least it would have meant I held on. He sounds like he did back at the hospital when his voice trembled like he was about to cry. It would have meant I had to lose a hand for them to take you. But I didn't. Izuku latches onto Todoroki's arm and pulls, drawing him closer, sick with the realization that Todoroki isn't about to cry anymore because he is crying, and Izuku's never seen that before. I let go. Todoroki's voice rusts, broken and shaking along with the rest of him. Izuku hauls him into a hug, hoping against hope that he isn't overstepping. He feels Todoroki's arms around him, tightening until it's almost painful, and Izuku squeezes back as he feels his shirt dampen at the shoulder. It's not his fault, it's never been his fault, and Izuku was never stupid enough to blame him, especially since he was the one who made him let go in the first place. But even if he could say that out loud, he knows Todoroki wouldn't believe him. I'm sorry I let go. I'm sorry I made you, Izuku thinks, even though it's a lie that Todoroki can't even hear. They stay that way until Mika comes, wriggling in between them insistently until they separate to accommodate her. Todoroki's eyes are red-rimmed but dry, and Izuku feels as if he's found something he's missed. He's not sure it's taken care of, but it's there, at least. It's out in the open so it can be taken care of. Inko comes home to find her son sitting quietly in front of one of his games, leaning up against Todoroki Shadow's side. Izuku is playing and his friend looks to be dozing, and Mika naps while stretched across their laps. Whatever remained of her misgivings about Yue are gone now. Seeing All Might weeping well and bracing him, seeing two of Izuku's friends bring a dog to cheer him up, seeing a third in front of her quietly keeping him company, she can't think it's a good idea to pull him away from them anymore. She can't take him away from people who love him just as much as she does. Chapter 42. Shadow's thoughts are not in a pleasant place at the moment. There are a wealth of reasons, but the main source of his troubles is the list of names and addresses beforehand. Somehow, he's supposed to go around to each and every one of these families and convince them to entrust the children's safety to him even further than before, in spite of his previous failures. Frankly, it's a miracle that he hasn't gotten any calls from parents demanding to pull their children out of UA entirely. He at least expected something from Midoriya or Bakuto's families, or Jiru since she was injured in the attack. But he hasn't. To his knowledge, not even Sekijuru has, and most of his kids ended up in the hospital. Still, passive forgiveness is one thing. Asking for further trust is another entirely. It'll be fine, Shouder. Yamada nudges his chair with his foot. We all saw how you did at the press conference. You handled it, and these are concerned parents, not tabloid journalists trying to trip you up with gotcha questions. Just because they won't be doing it for money doesn't mean they won't still be looking to blame someone, Shouder says flatly. Making house calls means making ourselves easy targets. True. Yamada shrugs, turning this way and that in his swivel chair. Could be worse. Most of Blood King's students ended up in the hospital, sir. More scared parents for him, you know. At least it's only Midoriya and Bakudo's families, plus maybe Jirui's. Not Midoriya's, actually, Shouder says. Yamada pauses mid-spen. Oh? All might call dibs, don't ask me why, Shouder replies. Even better. Single parents tend to be more protective anyway. Yamada resumes rotating in his chair. Anyway, besides them, the hardest family to deal with will be Ida's. And Todoroki's, maybe, haven't heard much from Endeavor lately, but apparently he's been fit to be tied. Shouder's expression darkens and Yamada must see it, because he stops again. What's that look for? Don't tell me Endeavor's got you worried. He doesn't, actually. Shouder has never liked Endeavor nor cared much about the man's opinion of him, so that isn't the problem. Truth be told, there isn't really a problem at all. He just doesn't like to be reminded of Ida and Todoroki's part in all of this. Not just them. Yaoirozu, Uraraka, and Kirishima as well. It took a while for him to gather all the facts, to consolidate excuses and half-truths and vague surveillance images and wildly conflicting accounts into a clearer picture of exactly what happened. And what happened was this: 5 of his students stepped onto the battlefield in Kamino Ward without license or authorization, placing themselves into the line of fire after narrowly escaping death just 3 days earlier. To make matters worse, most of the rest of his class probably knew about it and did nothing. It leaves a foul taste in his mouth, knowing that his students broke the law, that for their actions expulsion is entirely justifiable. It's something he has to consider, something he has to think carefully about, weighing options like hearts against feathers, so soon after dismissing Maeda. Had circumstances been different, he would have done it in a heartbeat. Hell, he probably could have justified the same punishment for the classmates who let them go. It wouldn't be the first class of hopefuls whose dreams he had dashed. It probably wouldn't be the last. But the circumstances are this: All Might's time has ended. The symbol of peace is a man once more. The system was already fragile, the world balanced upon a single pillar, and now that pillar is gone and their only hope is to rebuild their supports on the way down and hope they don't crash and burn. The world now needs heroes more than ever. It's a heavy thing, weighing the laws that hold the world together against the people who will grow up to uphold them. Can they be trusted to uphold those laws when they've already made the conscious decision to break them? Well, try not to worry about it too much, Yamada says, unaware of the mess in Shouder's head. You'll just make yourself grumpy, and that's the last thing you need. Hello, what's that? There's a knock at the door to the faculty office, quiet and politely brief. Shouder grunts, still working out a schedule and order in which to conduct home visits, so Yamada's the one who goes to answer it. He hears the door open and Yamada's voice chirp out a cheerful greeting, but doesn't look up or tune back in until Yamada calls his name. Hey Shouder, look who it is. He turns his head, half listening, until he catches sight of Midoriya Izuku in his peripherals. It's been a full week since Shouder last saw him, and he looks objectively better. He's standing straighter now, instead of hunched and small like an insect curling behind a echidna's shell. There's color in his cheeks, his hair is about as brushed as it's ever looked, and a little bit of the haunted light has left his eyes. But Shouder knows he's not where he used to be yet, and the point is only hammered home when Izuku signs a greeting. Strangely enough, it's comforting to see him. In the midst of his grim thoughts over passing judgment on so many of his students' futures, it's a relief to see one of the few students who aren't in any danger of wrongdoing or expulsion. Midoriya, what brings you here? As Shouder speaks, his eyes fall upon the small folder tucked under his student's arm. Instead of answering, Midoriya crosses the distance between them and slides the folder onto his desk. There's a note on it, scribbled in Midoriya's spidery handwriting. I took these from the villain's hideout. I forgot I had them in my pocket until later. Shouder opens the folder and finds 4 creased and wrinkled pages of what seem to be research notes, along with a small bag containing a hair sample. A light tap on his shoulder makes him look at Midoriya again, just in time to see him start signing. He says he wasn't sure who to give it to, so he figured you could pass it along to the right person. Yamada pipes up. Midoriya's head whips around, eyes going wide with shock, and Yamada grins. Yeah, I know sign. I'm better at it than him, too. Yamada, Shouder says flatly. What? I am. I can totally translate so the kid doesn't have to dumb it down for you. Yamada glances at Midoriya, who looks thoroughly bewildered by it all. Unless that was all you needed. Midoriya hesitates. Shouder can see the look on his face and guess what it means. It's the kind of hesitation that means that no, there is something more he needs, but is mentally weighing how important it is against how much he'd like to avoid inconveniencing anyone. It's well-meaning, certainly, but also misplaced. Midoriya, considering recent events, I'd much rather you say what you need than not. Midoriya shoots him an uncertain look, glances back at the door, and takes a deep breath to steady himself. It's not the first time Yamada's had to translate for someone, and Shouder knows it's about the only thing that can make his voice softer and more sedate. It makes it easier for Shouder to ignore him, tune him out, and focus on the person who's actually doing the talking. Are the others going to be in trouble? Midoriya asks him, and the relief is promptly gone. Shouder sighs and doesn't answer right away, which is probably enough of an answer on its own, judging by the way Midoriya's face falls. Midoriya. I don't want them to get in trouble for helping me, Midoriya cuts him off. They broke the law, Midoriya, Shouder says flatly. They broke several laws. They did it to save me, Midoriya says, and his nervous expression is morphing into a hard-set frown. They didn't try to fight any villains, they didn't get in the way of any of the heroes, and they saved me. They saved Bakugo, too. Shouder wonders if it would benefit him to know that he's outlining exactly what makes this dilemma so difficult. If they'd attacked a villain, if they'd hampered rescue efforts, it would be such an effortless decision to make, and yet. Where is the line drawn, Midoriya? He's not sure why he asks. It's not a question he's been able to answer, not in the past week nor in the entirety of his career. Where's the line between a good and a bad reason to break a law? Midoriya looks away. Not at Yamada or at the door again, but off to the side and at his own feet. Shouder knows why. It's an infuriating question. He's tired of having to ask it, knowing that it's only going to keep coming back, and he can tell right now that it's a question that Midoriya will be wrestling with, too. That's a stupid question. Shouder's eyes flicker back to his student, and he finds the boy glaring at him. There's no line, Midoriya says. That's like asking for an easy answer. So you don't ever have to think about it. Shouder sighs. Aizawa-sensei, I know they broke the rules, I know rules are there for a reason, but here he can see Midoriya stumble, hands wavering. I was alone. And I didn't know what to do. Nothing made sense anymore, and I was alone, and then they were just there. And suddenly I could see the path ahead of me again. They broke the rules, but they saved me, and doesn't that count for something? Each sign is short and choppy, and if he were using his voice, he'd probably be raising it. It could have gone much worse than it did, Midoriya, Shouder begins. But it didn't. And under normal circumstances, the consequences for their actions were both severe and final. These aren't normal circumstances, of course, and that's where all the trouble has been coming from. Midoriya doesn't answer right away. He's staring at Shouder, still glaring, but his eyes widen as he realizes what Shouder is saying. You're talking about expulsion. Midoriya. His student interrupts him one last time with a light knock to the surface of his desk. Shouder considers ignoring it and continuing to speak, but he can tell that Midoriya has something to say. I need you to understand that this isn't an attempt at a threat, Midoriya says. It wouldn't be much of one anyway, so it's just the truth. He hesitates, blinking hard as he steels himself to continue. If you expel any of them for what they did, then I'll be walking out that door too, right behind them. This part is what makes Yamada stumble over his translation. Midoriya says it's not a threat, but it kind of is, and Shouder can tell that it's not an empty one. Midoriya's eyes never leave his. Because if you did, then it would mean that my goals and the school's just don't line up. It would tell me that you care more about following rules than protecting people, and sensei, I've had teachers who felt that way all my life. I don't need one more. His eyes are steady and unblinking, burning with quiet vehemence, and this feels familiar to Shouder, but he can't place why. He never can. All in all, Bakugo's family is a lot more accepting of things than expected. As Toshinori predicted, they mostly have Aizawa to thank for that. He's seen video of the press conference of how viciously the press attacked the boys and of Aizawa's equally ruthless defense of both of them. Bakugo's parents are grateful. Toshinori himself is grateful. For all that Aizawa rightfully claims to hate the press, Toshinori can't help but feel that he handled that much more efficiently and effectively than even All Might could have. If anything, that aversion to the media is probably why the journalists and their questions were hard-hitting and Aizawa was angry enough to hit back. Through it all, Bakugo himself is strangely quiet. Toshinori catches the boy sneaking looks at him as if there's something he wants to know or something he wants to ask. He had been on the battlefield, the other villains had been surrounding him, but perhaps he had caught sight of Izuku standing near him and all for one. Perhaps he's wondering what was said. In the end, for all that he seems to want to, Bakugo asks him nothing. Midoriya is next on their list. You sure about this? Aizawa asks. Any particular reason why I shouldn't be? I visited Mrs. Midoriya the day after the attack. Something about her demeanor gave me the impression that I was lucky to leave that apartment alive. Toshinori almost snorts at this. I appreciate your concern, he says. But it really is necessary that I do this alone. If you say so. Aizawa shrugs and sits back. You know, most of the staff are convinced there's some tangible connection between you and Midoriya. Is that so? I told Yamada you were planning on taking care of this discussion with Midoriya's mother personally, and I'm pretty sure he's convinced half the faculty that it's a family matter to you. Toshinori coughs until he tastes copper in the back of his throat. If I could be so lucky, he rasped and leaves the car before Aizawa can respond. He knocks before he has the chance to lose his nerve. They know he's coming and is not likely to surprise them. Midoriya Inko answers the door, looking decidedly less unfriendly than he feared. She seems civil. Not quite cordial, but definitely not cold. He supposes that it must be difficult to be unfriendly to him, the way he is, battered, broken, bandaged, and still healing. In any case, Mrs. Midoriya smiles as she admits him, and it puts him more at ease before he steps inside. Past that threshold, he's seized with a strange sensation not unlike the familiar chill up his spine that has saved his life countless times before. It's a bit like foreboding, but not quite as ominous. It's not a threat of danger, no, it's more a sense of enhanced awareness, a distinct feeling of not alone. Odd, he thinks. Of course I'm not alone. I never expected to be. He can hear sounds from the television as he slips off his shoes. Mrs. Midoriya walks ahead of him at a brisker pace that is probably not meant to match, because she enters the living room several steps ahead of him and knocks softly on the wall. I hate to interrupt, he hears her say. But it's time, and I believe this is meant to be private. Izuku, if you could. It's at this point that Toshinori catches up to her, and he blinks in surprise when he sees not one, but two of his students seated on the sofa, glancing up from a paused video game that Toshinori can't identify. He was hardly expecting to find Todoroki here of all places, and yet here he is. Young Todoroki blinks at the side of him, and his eyes shift up and down and back again, as if taking in Toshinori's appearance one piece at a time. It's hard to bury the instinctive alarm, the habitual urge to duck away and transform, but, well, that's impossible now. This is the first time any of his other students have seen him, up close, in his true form. Hello, young Todoroki, he says, when the silence gets to be too much. Something like sadness is stealing into Todoroki's eyes, and Toshinori wants nothing more than to dispel it. It's good to see you're well. Todoroki gives him an awkward little nod. You too. His eyes flicker toward Mrs. Midoriya. I can go if you need. Beside him, Izuku waits for his mother's attention and signs. Toshinori catches "Do you need me?" Even though it goes by quickly. No, that's all right, Mrs. Midoriya replies. I can handle this myself. It won't be long, I promise. Izuku nods, bounds up off the couch, and turns off the TV and the game system. Todoroki barely has time to shoo the cat out of his lap before Izuku tows him out of the room by the arm. A few moments later, Toshinori hears one of the doors in the hallway open and close, and then quiet. He won't overhear anything from Izuku's room, Mrs. Midoriya assures him after inviting him to take a seat. In case he wanted to discuss anything sensitive. Sorry to worry you. It's all right, Toshinori replies. I just wasn't expecting, my other students it sooner than I thought. His voice trails off briefly. Though this is probably good to prepare myself. I see, she looks sympathetic. Still, I'm sorry about any inconvenience. I didn't want to turn him away when he came to visit. His father's been busy lately, so he might be getting a bit lonely, and it's good for Izuku, I think. She shakes herself. But that's not what you're here to talk about, is it? Toshinori nods. You've heard already, I assume. Yes, and before we continue, Mrs. Midoriya glances in the direction of the hallway and presumably her son's room. My son may not be present, but whatever you say here should be things you're all right with him hearing. I'm not about to hide things from him that concern him. Of course, Toshinori agrees readily. It's nothing too sensitive, for the most part. I'm mainly here to discuss the possibility of young Izuku moving into the school's new on-campus housing. He pauses. And of course, given the unique nature of his abilities and my connection to him, I thought it best that I conduct this meeting myself. He braces himself for her answer. She has been civil and welcoming, but that does not necessarily mean she will say yes. Mrs. Midoriya takes a deep breath and lets it out as a quiet sigh. I had reservations, she says bluntly. I hope you can understand why. I came very close to losing him. I spent 3 days not knowing if he would come back to me alive. And if she raises her eyes to meet his, just for a moment. Then there's your connection to him and the fact that you expected him to keep it from me. For what it's worth, Toshinori says quietly. If he had told me he intended to confide in you, I would not have stopped him. I would never have discouraged him from telling you. He hesitates. On the other hand, I also didn't encourage him to tell you either. And that was, I should have done things differently in that case. Millimeter, Mrs. Midoriya nods. I've discussed things with Izuku. I brought up the possibility of pulling him out of UA. Toshinori's heart seizes, but he says nothing. He was against it, of course. We had a long talk, and I've done some thinking, and if I did that, I would only hurt him. In fact, it would hurt him too much to justify, even with his safety on the line. Her voice shakes and cracks, and she passes the back of her hand over her eyes. I don't know that he's been safe there, or as safe as I'd like, but he's been happy. For the first time, he has friends and he has teachers who care about him, and school is something he looks forward to. I've seen his friends so many times over the past week, checking on him and cheering him up and making sure he's all right, and I can't take that away from him. And she purses her lips. I said before that I would trust you. And I did. And Izuku came home to me alive. So, in spite of my fears and in spite of everything, I suppose I have no reason not to keep trusting you. Her eyes rise to meet his again, and just for a moment Toshinori glimpses all the fear and desperation of a mother who came so close to losing her child. Please don't make me regret it. Before he even realizes he's risen from his seat, his knees are already meeting the carpet. The space is suddenly too small as he gathers the fumes of his strength and forces a transformation for the first time since his battle with All for One. It's no good. A few seconds later he loses it again, leaving him weak and shaking as he prostrates himself before her, swallowing blood and bile so he won't stain the rug beneath him. I give you my word, you won't, he says. I may not have much power left, but I swear to spend every drop of it raising him into the greatest hero he can possibly be. I will teach him, I will guide him, I will protect him, and if need be, I will give my life for him. You have my word. There's a soft thud, and Toshinori raises his head to find Mrs. Midoriya kneeling before him, looking at him more closely than she ever has before. The weight of her eyes makes him feel as if he is having his very soul weighed before him. That's won't do at all, she says at last, and Toshinori's heart sinks before she continues. My son needs a lot of things from you, but he doesn't need or want you dying for him. Her eyes narrow into a frown that brooks no argument. You live for him, do you understand? No matter what. Your death won't help him. In fact, there's no crueler way you could possibly hurt him. He might forgive you for it, but I'm not sure I could. Pressure builds in the back of his throat, tight and painful with guilt and the weight of his secrets. He never did tell Izuku what his future was supposed to hold. If he had, the woman before him would probably know it, too. His voice catches and he rises so that he's kneeling instead of prostrate. I am not in the best of health. But I will do my best to stay alive, for him. That's all I ask, Midoriya Izuku tells him as she helps him to his feet again. Who knows? Maybe he was supposed to die in Kamino. Maybe he missed it. He can only hope. He wishes he could ask. It's eerie to pack up his life in boxes. It's not something Izuku thought he'd have to do, not this soon, at least. Moving out is something he's supposed to do after graduation, not halfway through his first year of high school. It isn't permanent, he knows. Maybe it will only last until the threat from the League of Villains is gone. But that doesn't change the fact that he's sitting in his room, surrounded by cardboard boxes, trying to choose what to bring and what to leave behind. Most of the posters on his walls come down to be rolled up and packed. The thought of trying to sleep in a strange room with blank walls makes his mouth dry. If he has to live away from home, then he can at least make things as familiar as possible. He works slowly, thinking over every decision, stopping to remove Mika from various boxes. There isn't all that much to take, really. The rooms are already furnished with beds and desks and dressers, so all he really needs are bed covers, clothes, and personal decorations. He decides to take his game consoles, just in case those are allowed. If they aren't, then he can always send them back. One box he fills with dress clothes, just in case those are needed, you never know. Meal plans are included, but he still packs snacks and his favorite teas. So absorbed is he in packing that he doesn't hear Mom approaching until she's already setting another box down with a thud. He turns and Mika trots over to jump up on top of it. I packed her bowls, her food, her toys, litter, and one of her little beds, Mom tells him. You've been doing a good job of taking care of her and cleaning up after her, so I'm not too worried. Just remember to change the litter box or your classmates might not thank you. Izuku stares. I already made a few calls to make sure pets are allowed, she continues, scratching Mika behind the ears. Turns out you wouldn't even be the only one bringing one. I don't want you to get lonely, he says. Mom smiles sadly. I was always going to be a little lonely, she replies. But I think you'll need her more than I will. Take good care of her, all right. Keep her bowls clean and call me if she gets sick. I'll let you know when she's due for shots or a checkup, and we can take care of that as it comes. Izuku finishes dodging around boxes and hugs her. Her eyes are wet when she pulls back. Don't argue with me on this, now, she says. I'll feel better if she's there to keep an eye on you. She leads him to his packing after bat, and before long Izuku can hear her in the kitchen, getting lunch ready. It'll be the last lunch she makes for him before he moves into the dorms. Tomorrow. He's leaving tomorrow. His all-night nightlight is the last thing he needs to pack. It's silly, but again, he needs all the help he can get if he's going to settle into an unfamiliar room. He'll be fine without it for tonight, because he just knows that if he leaves it until the last minute, he's going to forget it for sure. But when he goes to retrieve it, he finds the outlet already empty. That's odd. Did he already pack it up and forget about it? He searches the floor around it, his bed and his desk, and finally starts reopening boxes. But the nightlight is nowhere to be found, much to his growing frustration. Part of him realizes that it's silly to get hung up over something so small that he's going to have trouble adjusting with or without it. But still he searches every box, lifting things out and putting them back in until he shuts the last one and sighs. He turns back toward his bed to check the outlet one last time and finds the nightlight hovering in front of his face, held in a small white hand. Rei sits cross-legged on his bed, hunched and small as she holds out the light. Izuku takes it, tosses it into a box, and hops up to sit with her. Rei turns to face him, scooting closer until their knees touch. I missed you, he says. I'm sorry. His heart sinks. Part of him was hoping to hear her voice again, though considering his own silence, that might be a little hypocritical right now. I'm sorry, too. Rei shakes her head, and her hair stirs far more than the movement warrants. You didn't know, she says. I didn't know either. I forgot. Izuku slips an arm around her and draws her into a one-armed hug. I forgot and I couldn't protect you, she says. I couldn't stop them when they took you. It's my fault you were there and it's my fault they hurt you. Izuku tries to say no out loud, but he can only form the silent shake with his mouth. He shakes his head, letting go so he can sign it properly. No. It's their fault for hurting me, not yours. She averts her head, and Izuku brushes her long hair out of her eyes until she looks at him again. And it's their fault for hurting you, too. Blackness spills from her eyes like tears, and she presses against him like she's trying to burrow into his chest. Mika hops up to join them on the bed, purring as Izuku lets Rei cry. I didn't want it back, she says when she can again. I don't want any of it. Any of what? Izuku asks. What they did. What they said. I don't want that. I don't want anything from before I found you. Rei shakes her head furiously, pausing only to scrub at her streaming eyes. I don't want to remember, I don't want my life, I don't want my name, I don't want any of it. Izuku's heart twists to see all of it. You don't want your real name. The lamp in his room flickers, and when she raises her head and lets her hair fall away from her face, Izuku can see the skull showing beneath flesh. Her translucent jaw opens, and for the second time, Izuku hears her speak, not quite the plaintive cry it had been before, but something caught between the child's voice and the wraith's rattlings now. My real name is Rei. The lamp flickers again and goes out. I'm not Hitomi, I don't want to be Hitomi. Nobody wanted Hitomi, they stole her and they killed her and nobody ever looked for her because nobody missed her. Hitomi had nothing. You of me, Izuku reminds her, fighting back tears. I would have looked. I would have missed you, her promise. Her hair falls still and her face looks like a little girl's face again. The lamp flickers back on, and she's crying too, fat black tears rolling down her face as she answers with her hands instead of her broken voice. Rei has you. Rei has a little brother. Rei has friends. But I didn't have that until I was Rei. That's the only name I want. That's the only me that matters. Izuku pulls her into another hug, so tight that he has to force himself to be gentler, because even though she's dead and he can't damage her, he might still cause her pain. She hugs back, fingers gripping handfuls of his shirt as he presses his face into her hair. It's only like that, in the solitude of his room with only a cat and his best and oldest friend to hear, that Izuku can manage it. It's too soon for it to be fixed entirely, but right now, just for a moment, he can manage it. You always matter, Ne-chan, he whispers into her hair, so softly that he can barely hear it himself. I love you. It could be his imagination, but he thinks he hears an I love you too, in a child's voice that no one living remembers, that no one living will ever hear again. Just him. Midoriya shows up on moving day with his cat, and absolutely no one is surprised. Shadow finds himself moving to stand with him, though he's not sure why. It's not like Midoriya is his only friend in class, he had been holding a perfectly pleasant conversation with Yaoyorozu before spotting him. He just feels a bit more sure of things the closer he is, and while it probably isn't normal to feel like the world's axis is a bit off when he doesn't know where Midoriya is, the solution of standing just a bit closer to him isn't enough of an inconvenience to bother him. Upon seeing him, Midoriya offers a weak little smile but nothing more, and Shadow gets the sense that his friend still isn't talking. That's worrying, but it's also good to know that his recent efforts won't have gone to waste. Endeavor has been too busy to set foot in the house since the Camino incident, and it's left Shadow with a lot of time on his hands. Emphasis on hands. He nudges Midoriya lightly, and when Midoriya looks at him again, he signs a quick good morning. Midoriya's hands are too full of cat to reply, but that doesn't stop him from staring at Shadow like he hummed a moan. Time well spent, then. Hopefully Midoriya won't mind being patient with him while he practices. The mood among their classmates is somber. Of course it is, after everything that's happened and everything that's changed. Todoroki is somewhat surprised that everyone is still here, even Jiro, who was hospitalized from breathing in the poison gas. No one was pulled from UA or forbidden from staying in the recently built dons, but everyone's feeling the weight of things. Bakugo in particular is uncharacteristically quiet, barely acknowledging Kirishima's attempts to draw him into a conversation. And things only dip further down when Aizawa addresses them all. In a few moments I'll give you all a quick briefing in regards to the dons, he says. But first, his eyes sweep the class, pausing exactly 5 times. Todoroki catches his gaze on one of them. The original plan was for you to earn provisional licenses after the camp. That fell through, of course, and you haven't gotten them yet, so why was some of you acting like he did? The mood turns from somber to tense. Todoroki, Kirishima, Uraraka, Yaoirozo, and Ida. It takes all of Shouder's willpower to stand steady and remain unmoved. You were all present that evening at the side of Bakudo and Midoriya's rescue. You took it upon yourselves to interfere with an active rescue operation. Under normal circumstances, I would be perfectly justified in expelling all of you, as well as every one of your classmates who knew of your intentions and did nothing. Most of the class shifts uncomfortably, and Shouder clenches his teeth, wrestling with his own rising guilt. Of course, the possibility of punishment had occurred to him, he'd been prepared for it. But he hadn't realized he might risk dragging the rest of the class down with him. In the end, All Might's retirement prevented me from making that decision, Aizawa continues. Though, the fact that someone spoke up for you vehemently certainly didn't hurt. Beside him, Midoriya shifts so that he's hiding slightly behind Shouder. But from here on out, I would appreciate if you all would make an effort to avoid breaking anti-vigilantism laws in the future, if nothing else, as a matter of repairing broken trust. He takes a moment more to watch them, to see if his words are sinking in, before turning toward the building in front of them. All right then. Let's head in. The class is slow to follow, the air festering with unease and guilt and low spirits. It's only broken when Bakugo, of all people, grabs Kaminari, drags him a safe distance from the others, and startles him into discharging enough electricity to short-circuit his brain. The resulting stumbling, coupled with the foolish grin on Kaminari's face, sets laughter rippling through the class. The tense mood cracks, and Kaminari's good-natured clowning distracts everyone while Aizawa rolls his eyes and Bakugo pulls Kirishima aside to finally talk to him. As the class follows Aizawa inside, Shouder turns back to find Midoriya doing his best to hide behind his cat. "That was you, wasn't it?" he says. Midoriya jumps. "The one who spoke up. It seems like something you'd do." Midoriya stares at him, round-eyed. He can't sign with his hands full, so instead he finger spells, slowly enough for Shouder to follow. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Of course, Shouder says, straight-faced. He tunes back into what Aizawa is saying, just in time to see the room allocation chart on display in the first-floor common room. He's in the room at the end of the hall on the second floor. His only neighbor is Midoriya. After a quick tour, Aizawa-sensei releases them to unpack their luggage and get settled into their new dorms. Izuku's first order of business is setting up litter boxes. He brought 3, just to be safe. One goes into the laundry room on the first floor, one in his own bathroom, and one in the corner of the second-floor hallway. For now, he puts Mika's bowls in his own room. He might move them once she gets more comfortable around here. From there, he sets up his own living space. He makes his bed, puts up posters, arranges things in his new desk, and sets up his bathroom. Within just a few hours, everything is in place and Mika is happily lapping water from her bowl. He opens his door just in time to see Razor by, in the midst of exploring. She won't be alone here, either. Hino seems committed to following Todoroki instead of Endeavor now, and Tensei's one floor up with Ida. Ida? It's surreal to think about Ida and Uraraka now. They know now. He's told them, and in spite of all his fears, they seem all right with it. Uraraka seems to have accepted it, at least. But Ida? Ida knows, but he doesn't know. And now that Izuku has told him one earth-shattering secret, it only seems right to tell him the next. It makes sense, doesn't it? He has the right to know. He deserves to know about Tensei. And maybe on some level he already does. Maybe he suspects, and he just doesn't know how to ask, any more than Izuku knows how to tell him. How hard could it possibly be? "Hi, Ida, how are you settling in?" "Good. By the way, remember how your brother's death almost shattered you and sent you down a dark path of vengeance? Well, he's still here, and he says hi, and he saw all of that because he's always watching you. Sleep well." And, of course, he'd have to say all of that without talking. He'd have to text it to him, for heaven's sake. The sound of bumping next door breaks him out of his thoughts, and he glances over at the other door with mild concern. That's Todoroki's room. Tokoyami's is on the other side and has been fairly quiet. Izuku goes for his phone to send a quick "everything okay over there?" 3:49 Todoroki. Fine. 3:50 me. I'm done in my room. Do you need help? It takes a couple of minutes for his friend to reply. 3:52 Todoroki. Doors open. Pocketing his phone, Izuku slips out into the hallway with Mika at his heels. Sure enough, Todoroki's door is ajar and he nudges it open to see what's making all that noise. He stops, blinking in astonishment. "Hello," Todoroki says, barely looking up from where he's kneeling on the floor. "I don't want to bother you, but if your offer was serious, I was just moving some furniture." Moving some furniture? It looks more like Todoroki's trying to remodel by himself. His furniture has been shoved around, but only to make room for. "Are you putting in tatami flooring?" Izuku asks, bewildered. "And why don't you have a bed in here?" Todoroki blinks owlishly at him. "Sorry. Could you repeat that?" Izuku does so, more slowly, until Todoroki understands. "Oh. Yes." For a moment, Todoroki, calm, collected, eternally unruffled Todoroki, looks almost embarrassed. "It's what I'm used to, at my parents' place. Japanese style, not Western. It's hard to settle down without it, and I sleep better on a futon than a bed, so I asked Aizawa-sensei ahead of time. He said it was fine if I brought my own. It's more work than I thought it'd be, but it's hard to settle down without it." Izuku thinks of the posters on his walls and his all-might night light and can't help but grin a little. Mika is already making herself comfortable on a tatami mat that hasn't been placed yet, so Izuku steps inside and closes the door behind him. They finish up hours later, thoroughly exhausted, and neither of them win the impromptu room decorating contest. Turns out neither a DIY remodel nor a pat cat can stand in the face of the homemade chiffon cake that Sato's room offers, but the day ends with Izuku in somewhat better spirits. The prospect of assigned rooms had been a little nerve-wracking, but Todoroki's one of his best friends and Tokoyami's easy to get along with, too, so he could have done a lot worse in terms of assigned neighbors. Sato's cake was delicious, and in spite of all the changes, things are starting to creep back toward normal. All in all, it's a good end to a good day. He texts his mother and goes to bed satisfied, with Mika draped over his legs instead of in her cat bed. His new bed is comfortable and his sheets are from home. It's a nice room. It's nice here. He could have done without waking up in a cold sweat in the dead of night, but that's not something anyone can really control. Shouder doesn't wake up screaming anymore. He trained himself out of that early. Endeavor is a light sleeper, and noises in the night draw his attention so easily. And so Shouder awakens from nightmares with a dry mouth and a sore throat instead, and the air around him stirs as the temperature fluctuates. For a while he sits up in bed, taking deep, slow breaths until his quirk is under control again, fingers curling and uncurling in his comforter. His wrist healed a while ago, but it still feels stiff sometimes. His phone is in his hand before his brain catches up, and he realizes with a jolt that he fully intends to bother Midoriya with a text at 3 in the morning, apparently. "Don't be stupid." "He's fine, you idiot. He's in the room right next to yours, and he won't thank you for waking him up when he already gets terrible sleep as it is." His mouth is parched. They are supposed to have a curfew, but he hopes that a quick trip down to the common room will be all right. It's a little unnecessary if all he wants is a drink of water. Each dorm room comes with a fridge and a bathroom, his included, but the walk helps loosen his tightly wound nerves. An ember in his left hand lights his way down the dark stairwell and then back up it. No one swoops in and demands that he go back to bed, to his relief. He's not afraid of getting in trouble, he'd just rather no one see him like this. By the time he emerges from the stairwell on his floor, he's breathing normally again and somewhat dreading going back to sleep. If he has another crawling nightmare, then he'll have to calm himself down all over again. Glowing eyes flash at him in the dark, and Shouder jumps. Midoriya's door is open, and his friend sits in the doorway and leans against the frame. His head is turned to face Shouder, eyes glowing eerily in the dim light of the ember. After a moment he turns away again and stares at the opposite wall instead. He doesn't look any better than Shouder feels. Shouder reaches his own door and pauses. He glances over at Midoriya, still sitting and staring off into space in a dark hallway at 3 a.m., no doubt in for a terrible morning when he actually has to get up and function. Shouder almost feels stupid for having nightmares. He only saw a fraction of what Midoriya went through, the tail end of one evening after 3 days. He realizes that his pulse is up again and is not calm anymore. Midoriya turns his head to look at him again, as if sensing him staring. The glow in his eyes winks in and out of view as the angle changes. The decision is quick, easy, and uncomplicated. Shouder opens his door and steps to the side. He doesn't speak, neither of them do, but he hopes the invitation is clear. Midoriya stares at him for a moment more, then climbs to his feet and moves to shut his door. He waits first for Mika to come out, and Shouder lets both of them in. Mika beats both of them to the futon, but Midoriya hangs back as if uncertain, and it's not until Shouder's settling back down that he finally moves forward. Shouder holds up one corner of the comforter for him, and Midoriya crawls under and curls up against his side with a quiet sigh. The futon isn't too small to fit both of them, but there's only one pillow and Midoriya seems content to stay close. It's not that the nightmares stop there for the rest of the night. But the next time Shouder wakes up from one, all he has to do is turn his head and know, there he is, yes he's fine, yes he's breathing, go back to sleep. It saves a lot of time, that's all. Chapter 43. Toshinori wakes up in a cold sweat again. He grasps at the fading flashes of troubled dreams, snatches of words and voices that slip from his grasp like fine sand. He keeps his eyes closed and is breathing slow, fighting to stay in that hazy limbo between sleep and reality in an attempt to carry thoughts from one world to another, but it comes to nothing in the end. Toshinori opens his eyes to a pounding heart, a tired mind, and no more answers than he ever had before. Transferring his life from one place to another was done almost thoughtlessly. His place of residence is less a home and more a place to keep things and sleep occasionally, and his private room in the New Heights Alliance dormitory serves those purposes just as well. The fact that he's having trouble sleeping has nothing to do with where he happens to be. Something tells him these fears and worries would follow him from the dubious comfort of home to the ends of the earth. The only thing that sticks with him is a voice, because that voice was not from a dream, but was very, very real. You believe yourself the savior of the world when you failed to save someone who should have been so close to you. Shigaraki Tamura, born Shimoa Tenko. Toshinori shuts his eyes, curls up on his side as if he can ward off the memory. What would your precious Nana say if she knew that you had failed her own grandson? He can't. Can't escape the memory, can't demand answers from a dead man, can't even hear the frantic whisper so close to his ear, not your fault, Tashi, never your fault. Izuku wakes up worn. He wakes up pleasantly drowsy, which happens rarely. Usually he wakes up feeling like death warmed over, or feeling wired and restless, nothing in between. Waking up in the morning is rarely comfortable, and yet here he is now, curled up warm with his cheek pressed against. Something rises and falls under his arm, and Izuku's eyelids drag open. Ah. Right. There's only one pillow, and Izuku has apparently foregone using it in favor of mashing his face against Todoroki's shoulder instead. He has an arm thrown loosely over his friend's torso, rising and falling slightly as Todoroki breathes. Before Izuku can gather his thoughts back into organized sets, Todoroki stirs, his steady breathing shifts, and suddenly Izuku isn't the only one awake anymore. It's disconcerting, almost. A lot of things make perfect sense in the wee hours of the morning, only to turn out odd and strange and confusing once the sun rises and common sense returns. For example, he knows, logically, that Todoroki was the one who held his door open, didn't protest when Izuku took the silent invitation, and then literally invited him into bed. They may not have exchanged a single spoken word, but it all felt very clear and straightforward at the time. All the clutter in his head and the uncertainty that came with being awake at s:00 in the morning pointed to a clear course of action, and Izuku had taken it. But now it's morning. Now it's all gone, the darkness and the fear and the nightmares that still felt semi-real, but Izuku's still here, lying in Todoroki's bed and using him as a pillow while they both wonder where they stand now. At least, Izuku's wondering. He can't say for sure what Todoroki feels at the moment. A stab of unreasonable panic has him sitting up, disentangling himself from Todoroki as carefully as possible. Embarrassment runs through him, thick and sticky and uncomfortably warm, and the split-second view he has of Todoroki's face only makes it worse, because Todoroki looks every bit as awkward and embarrassed about this whole thing as Izuku feels. He'd rather not endure an uncomfortable silence, nor force Todoroki to ask him to leave, rather not have to hear it and be unable to answer back. So instead, he signs a quick thanks for letting me stay that he's sure Todoroki doesn't even catch and makes a hurried exit. Thankfully there's no one out in the hall and his own door is all of 2 steps to the right, so Izuku ducks in and tries to settle his nerves in the solitude of his own room. He realizes, rather belatedly, that he left his cat. Training kickstarts that very morning. They have quite a bit of lost time to make up, considering that training camp got cut down to all of 3 days. Izuku wonders if the 3 subsequent days he spent locked in a hellhole will make a difference. He didn't get much combat practice in, he mostly just ran around, talked to ghosts, and cried a lot. The provisional license exam is coming up. If they pass, it will mark their next step toward becoming heroes. It's only a glorified learner's permit, and they'll still be restricted in what they can do, but it will authorize them to take action against villains in the future without the threat of legal consequences. Izuku grinds his teeth as Aizawa-sensei tells them all of this. He sees the back of Uraraka's head whenever he faces forward, and if he glides to the right he can see Kirishima 2 seats down. He is to turn a bit further to see Ida, Todoroki, and Yara Rosa. They came so close to getting expelled after coming to help him, he thinks. He only really has Aizawa's word to go on that, and the man does have a history of fibbing to make a point or motivate them. But it could have happened. It would have made sense for it to happen. It wouldn't have been fair, but it wouldn't have been out of nowhere, either. He hopes they all pass. Then, if there's a next time, maybe they won't have to risk their futures for the sake of saving lives. Then he hears what the order of business for the day is supposed to be, and Izuku takes a deep breath and lets it out in what sounds suspiciously like a sigh. Uraraka twists around in her seat, in Bakugo's old seat, and her face is lit with a blinding grin. Special moves, she shouts at him. I've been brainstorming lately, how about you, Deku? He shrugs. He is full cowl, but that's not a special move so much as a way for him to use one for all safely at all. He's imitated All Might's signature smash moves, but he hasn't been able to manage any of them without breaking bones, and, well, he's not All Might, is he? All for One was twisted, manipulative, and evil, but he wasn't quite wrong about everything. All Might is All Might, and it's up to Izuku to learn from him but not to be hen. Their teachers are going all out for this. Izuku never expected anything different, but it's extra clear when they reach the training ground for today. Besides Aizawa-sensei, they are joined by Midnight, Cementos, and Ectoplasm. While Aizawa and Midnight instruct them one-on-one, Cementos tailors the environment to their individual needs, and Ectoplasm spawns dozens of clones to use as training dummies. Explosions fill the air. Bakugo's already getting started. He's got a head start already. Izuku knows he's been making up moves since his quirk first came in, and he's already got several ready that just need improvement. Everyone else is dispersing, talking to Cementos for requests, asking Aizawa for help, or going off to do their own thing. Uraraka's already airborne, looking determined but slightly green. Eventually, the only one still standing near him is Rei. Near is a relative term, of course. Her attention is turned outward, watching his classmates train their quirks and figure out new applications, and Izuku finds himself watching her, too. His hands flutter at his sides, fingers spelling along with his rapid-fire thoughts. He has 2 options, the way he sees things: either keep developing his use of one for all the way he was before the villains showed up, and hope something comes of it eventually, or try to think of something new. Something he hasn't quite tried before. There's an obvious solution to his problem, of course. If he wants to be someone who isn't All Might, someone who isn't even all that much like All Might, then the best place to start is the part of himself that All Might doesn't have, and has never had. It all comes back to his first quirk. Having trouble. Izuku jumps, half turns in midair, and catches himself so he can properly face All Might. There's a split-second moment of alarm when he sees that he's surrounded by students in his true form, not his hero form, but... oh. Right. His mentor smiles at him. Did I sneak up on you just now? I don't think that's ever happened before. Izuku manages to smile back, but is not sure it's completely convincing. All Might looks upright. He's standing upright and seems to have no problem doing so, but... he's injured still. Bandages cover his forehead, his arms, one of which is in a sling, and at least part of his chest, judging by the edge of white peeking out from beneath the loose collar of his shirt. Izuku is used to seeing him in this form, but for the first time, All Might looks so breakable to him. There are extra shadows beneath his eyes that Izuku knows he's never seen before, and now that he's looking at All Might properly, he can tell that there isn't much behind the smile. "Are you okay to be out here?" He starts to ask, but over All Might's shoulder, Nana shakes her head at him. "Let him help, kiddo," she says. "He needs the distraction. And I'm pretty sure that you don't not need the help." "I was distracted," Izuku says instead. "I'm trying to work out what I want to do." All Might nods. "Just remember," he hesitates, and his lips go pale when he presses them together for a moment. "Don't you know not to copy me? Right?" His voice goes soft when he says that, his face troubled, and Izuku tries not to wince. It's uncomfortably close to what they've both heard from All for One. But it's not wrong, in fact it's the rightest thing either of them know at this point. They haven't even had the chance to talk about it, what All for One said and did, what Izuku saw, how he feels about escaping his grasp, how either of them feel now that he's dead. "I know," Izuku says, before it can get more awkward. "But it's harder to figure it out when I only know what not to be, and not what I'm supposed to be." He activates full cowl, feels the power course through him, not all of it, but enough, and that's the frustrating part. He is what he needs. He just doesn't know what to do with it yet. "It's not an easy answer," All Might says. "And unfortunately, it's not one that can be fed to you. Because what you're supposed to be is you, and at the end of the day, no one else can tell you what that means, oh dear." He turns as something falls out of his back pocket. While he's looking away, Izuku takes the opportunity to shoot a glare at Rei for slipping it out in the first place, the little menace. All Might heaves a sigh and looks as if he's about to try and stoop to retrieve it, in spite of his injuries. Relaxing his power, Izuku darts in and picks it up before he can strain himself. It's a book, and Izuku sees the cover before he can think better of it. Teaching for Dummies. All Might looks terribly embarrassed, and it's a lot easier to grin at him when he looks like that. Izuku holds the book out, then shoots a quick sidelong glare at Rei when she tries to grab it and snope. He feels the book tug in his grasp and pushes it into All Might's hands before Rei can try to steal it back. Rei's hand is so close to All Might's, pale but solid looking to his eyes, that for a split second Izuku's heart clenches when her fingers nearly brush against his. Full cowl is back before Izuku even registers activating it. That's something. He's not just making it up, it's not just in his head, that's something, and maybe it can become even more. Maybe. Young Midoriya. His attention snaps back to All Might. His teacher is looking at him closely. "Sorry. Have an idea. I'm gonna go test it." All Might smiles again and moves on to speak with Jiro. Another explosion rocks the facility, and Izuku can hear him raising his voice to be heard. Izuku considers signaling Nana, but she doesn't know sign that well, and it would take too long and draw too much attention to try to communicate with her. He'll stick with Rei for now. Taking her hand, he leads her to another part of the training ground where cement columns provide some cover, far enough away from the others that he's not worried about being overheard. He activates full cowl, glances at his teachers to make sure they aren't watching and won't think he's sneaking off to slack, and turns to Rei. "I want to try something," he says. "And I need your help to do it." She stands a little straighter, eager and interested, and Izuku takes a deep breath and settles his thoughts. It had been a wild, chaotic moment. He hadn't thought much of it, not when it was happening and not now. It had just happened, and there hadn't been time, and after everything was over he'd been too focused on knitting his mind back into something resembling order and reason. He'd been running on pure instinct at the time, and couldn't have worked out if it was something concrete or just a vague feeling in the heat of the moment. The dead had been everywhere, countless souls crowded around him, reaching out for him as they pushed him toward freedom. And in that moment, some part of him had reached back. "Tell me if this..." "I don't know, feels bad," he says uncertainly. Rei nods, and Izuku reaches for her. It's hard to recreate that feeling here in a controlled environment instead of a screaming battlefield in the middle of the city. But Izuku does his best, taking Rei's cold hand, reaching inside of himself and pushing. Her form flickers, hair riding, and she shoots up off the ground and sends concrete dust wafting up. Alarmed, Izuku lets go, but she seems okay. A little dazed, maybe, but not unhappy. "You okay?" Izuku asks. "Fine," she says, blinking. "Feels funny. Sort of buzzy." She floats back as she answers and hits the closest cement column. As in, she actually hits it. It stops her. Rei blinks. Izuku blinks. Slowly, she turns around and puts her hand to it. She can still phase through it like a mirage, like she always does, but it's not automatic. She can touch it, too. Rei looks upward. On top of the column, maybe 10 feet off the ground, is a chunk of cement about half again as big as her head. It's probably rubble blown this way by Bakudo's quirk, and it's far bigger than anything Izuku has ever seen a ghost be able to move. In a blur of black and white, Rei flits up to the top of the column and gives the cement chunk a hard shove. As Izuku watches, the chunk goes tumbling off the top of the column and lands with a scrape and a thud on the ground near where Izuku stands. Izuku gapes. Once upon a time, a lifetime ago, he'd seen a broken TV nearly fall on All Might's head. But that had been a heavy and unstable mass, balanced in an already precarious position on a rickety stack of garbage. It had been dislodged, not pushed, and the culprit had been a very upset, very volatile poltergeist. Rei rejoins him, passing mist-like through the column on her way down. "I think it's gone now," she says. "Whatever it was. Can we do that again?" Ochiko has a pretty good vantage point, 10 feet off the ground. Her stomach is protesting vehemently, but it's taking her considerably longer to puke than it used to, so she counts it as progress. The edges of her vision are beginning to blur when she sees a familiar little figure in black and white just within her peripherals. But when she turns her head, all she sees is Deku standing in the middle distance, quirk activated. She releases her quirk to give herself a break and sighs with relief when the vertigo eases. A month or so earlier, she might have convinced herself that nausea was making her see things, but now... well, now she knows better. The first day of end-of-summer boot camp runs long and hard. It's hardly the worst training Shadow has ever experienced, but it's considerably more intense than the usual school training, and it leaves most of the class worn out. For his part, Shadow only feels comfortably tired by the time they're released back to the dorms, and he only becomes aware of how bad it is for the others when he and Ida walk into the common room and find their classmates sprawled out on the couches, looking half dead. Ida's booming voice reaches every corner of the room. "That was an excellent day of training. Remember to go to bed, Olmf." A couch cushion nails him in the face, followed by furious shushing from Uraraka, Kirishima, and Asui. "Pipe down, Ida." Uraraka whisper shouts, and it's easy to see the reason. Midoriya is slumped against her side, apparently fast asleep. "Oh." Ida lowers his voice as well, which is quite a feat for Ida. "My apologies. Though perhaps it would be better for him to return to his room. We may all be tired, but a little roughness is par for course in our class, and he might appreciate being able to sleep without being disturbed." Uraraka gives him a positively wounded look, and Shadow can kind of understand why. Moving Midoriya means waking him up first, and he looks peaceful enough that it feels wrong to do so. Nope. Too late. Another stage whisper comes from Kaminari, wandering over with a marking pen twirling in his hand. Uraraka's wounded expression turns venomous. Kaminari grins with pure mischief on his face. "Hey, if he didn't want to get pranked, then he shouldn't have fallen asleep down here, am I right?" "He's not wrong," Asui says dryly, and disregards the glare that Uraraka throws at her. "Just don't wake him up, Kaminari-chan." "Course not, wouldn't dream of it." Kaminari crouches down so he can reach Midoriya's face with a steadier hand, and he must not sense the impending death close by. That's his own fault. Shadow is much farther away, and even he can see the murder in Uraraka's eyes. "Kaminari," he says, about to warn him, right before main lab flickers and goes out. It doesn't exactly plunge the room into darkness, but the change from well-lit to dim is jarring enough. Kaminari pauses, the pen dangerously close to Midoriya's sleeping face, and glances around. "Oh, come on, what gives?" "It's an electrical light," Kirishima points out. "Why don't you take a look at it?" Kaminari snorts, but stands up anyway, the pen slipping from his fingers as he turns away. "Whoops, hang on, oh come on, where'd my pen go?" "Uraraka, did you kick it under the sofa?" "No, ma." "Yeah, I did." Uraraka levels another glare at him. "You're not getting it back, and I'm telling Momo not to make you another one." Kaminari rolls his eyes and goes to check the light. He's only a step away from it when it flickers back on, as bright and steady as if nothing happened. "Oh, boo, I lost a pen for nothing," Karma, Asura says, and it's echoed raggedly by most of the others. Ida pulls Kaminari aside for a stage-whispered lecture on being considerate to classmates during their off hours, and Shadow moves to find his own seat. He's not quite tired enough to go to bed yet, and he doesn't mind the company. Uraraka catches him by the wrist as he shuffles past her. "Hey, Todoroki, I'm glad you finally got here," she says in a hushed voice. "Switch with me, I have to go to the bathroom." "What?" Shadow says, but doesn't fight her when she manhandles him into a spot and transfers Midoriya's limp, slightly drilling head from her shoulder to his. Uraraka springs to her feet with a sigh of relief. "You're a lifesaver," she tells him, and rushes off to the first-floor bathrooms. Midoriya barely moves through the entire exchange, not that Shadow blames him, he spent at least the second half of the day just on quirk-strengthening exercises, so it's no wonder he's tired. Shadow's tired, too, his muscles ache, and his whole body aches in that peculiar way it always does when he strains his limits when using his quirk. But it's easy to sit on the soft couch, to angle himself into a comfortable surface for Midoriya to sleep on, to regulate his quirk to a pleasant level of warmth. It's easy. He has no idea why it's so easy to offer comfort when he spent his whole life being denied it, but that's a train of thought that he's not quite prepared to have while surrounded by quietly rowdy classmates who tend to jerk in the face of sincerity. Maybe he'll ask his mother about it the next time he sees her. It seems like something she'd know about. Eventually, they all drag themselves upstairs and into bed. Shadow's sorry to see Midoriya wake up, but Midoriya himself barely seems to notice as he limps his way up to the second floor. The only time he shows signs of wakefulness is when he fights the others' attempts to herd him into the elevator, so Shadow resigns himself to helping drag him up the stairs instead. He leaves Midoriya at his bedroom door, and that's the last Shadow sees of him for the rest of the evening. This time, when Shadow wakes up with the sensation of fingers slipping from his grasp, he's alone. He can't turn his head and reassure himself, because there's no one else in the room with him. Logically, he should know that Midoriya's right next door, alive and well and probably too tired to deal with this nonsense, but it's hard to have a grasp on logic when you've just woken up in a literal cold sweat in the middle of the night. His room is a double-edged sword. The familiarity is calming, tatami flooring and the softness of a futon and comforter, but at the same time familiarity brings memories, not all of them pleasant. He sleeps well on a futon with tatami mats underneath him because that's all he's ever known, but he's known them at the same time as he's known other, far less pleasant things. Shadow blinks and finds himself standing in front of Midoriya's door. He doesn't want a walk and a drink of water. He knows what he wants, he knows what will help, but he hesitates. Of course he does. He's had bad dreams before. He's carried himself through bad nights. He can do it because he's always done it, because he never had a choice, because asking for help got him shouted at or worse, so why is it so easy to do it now? He stands there for a good few minutes before the door opens, Midoriya's tired face peers out, and Shadow feels positively wretched. It must show on his face, going by the fact that Midoriya doesn't shut the door on him. Instead, he opens it wider. Midoriya stands to the side, and the invitation is as clear as it was when Shadow offered the same. It's dark, too dark to see All Might's face in the posters on the wall. Midoriya's already shuffling back toward his bed, shifting Mika to one side, when Shadow halts in the middle of the room. He's sleepy and miserable, but not so much that he's forgotten the awkwardness of the previous morning. He remembers and is not eager to repeat it tomorrow. Is this okay? Speaking feels wrong, and Shadow doesn't know why. Is it the darkness? The late hour? The fact that Midoriya can't answer back the same way? I didn't mind. But if you, I mean. I don't want to bother you. You don't have to. Midoriya turns back to him and sighs audibly. He sounds put upon. Not with his presence, Shadow realizes. Just with the questions. The hesitation. His classmate signs something, but it's dark and Shadow is still a beginner. He catches the sign for sleep, but no more. Midoriya sighs again, and for a single vague instant, Shadow feels as if he's being nudged forward. He hasn't slept in a bed since his last hospital stay. He hasn't slept in a real bed since ever. It's softer than his futon, but not as soft as he expected. Sleeping so high off the ground is something he'll never quite get used to. But Midoriya is there, and Midoriya has this odd knack for making things easy, for making complicated things a great deal simpler, and for quieting the thoughts in his head until Shouder knows what to do. Shouder falls asleep and stays asleep, and it's easy. Things fall into a routine for the rest of the week. During the day, Izuku trains both of his quirks. With one for all alone, he pushes the limits of his endurance, fighting to bring up his maximum percentage without causing injury. He spars with his classmates, with ectoplasm's clones, with anyone who isn't Bakugo. A hairline fracture in his wrist sends him first to Recovery Girl and then to the support department, where eagle-eyed Hatsumi listens to his requests and modifies his costume to have proper support for his arms. Rei helps with the other half of his training, and eventually so do Tensei and Nana and Narita and even Hino. Izuku fills notebook pages with observations and scribbled theories. He's empowering the dead, both with his presence alone and with an active use of his own power. He's not sure how it happens yet, or how to make it stronger. He wishes there was someone he could ask. There could be, he reminds himself whenever All Might is near. At night, he sleeps as much as he can. He doesn't go to Todoroki for every nightmare. Sometimes they aren't bad, sometimes they're the old nightmares of past ghosts and closet doors, and he can suffer through those without bothering anyone else. He only dreams about Kamino a few times. When he does, it sends him to the room next door, heart in his throat as he crawls into Todoroki's bed and fights back his terror with firm, solid reality. The next morning, they wake up and don't talk about it. They probably should. Hino says they should, and even Rei keeps giving him disapproving looks whenever he flees back to his own room. But Shouder's sign is barely passable outside of fingerspelling, and this isn't a discussion to have over text, is what Izuku tells himself when he puts it off yet again. The nights he spends by himself are probably obvious to the others. They are too polite to say anything, even when he nods off during the day, even though he only ever does that on other people. He dozes on Kirishima's shoulder over breakfast one morning, and that's sort of what takes it from an amusing novelty to an actual thing. It's a quiet, easy transition. Izuku weathers gentle teasing from Kaminari and Shiro and a few of the others. For some reason they only get really insufferable when it's Todoroki's shoulder he nods off on, but is never quite awake enough to try analyzing that. He doesn't see why it's so funny, anyway. It's just easiest to shut his brain up when he's around Todoroki. Being around him is comfortable. It's safe in a way that Izuku never quite feels on his own. They're good friends, and that's part of being good friends, isn't it? Gradually, as days pass and he spends more time training and surrounding himself with friends, it starts to feel less and less like he has a padlock on his tongue. Shouder wakes up to Mika trying to wash his hair. There's no pillow under his head, because Midoriya seems to have stolen it at some point during the night, and he raises his head with a soft groan at the crick in his neck. It's a tiny noise, but still enough to wake his friend. Midoriya stirs and snuffles quietly on his left, and Mika leaves off grooming Shouder's hair to sit on his head. Midoriya groans at this, and the sound is thunderous, both because the room is silent and because it's technically the first time Shouder has heard his voice in weeks. It's not even words, but it's still good to hear. His friend sits up with a yawn, spills Mika to the floor, and untangles himself from the covers before getting to his feet. Reluctantly, Shouder rubs sleep out of his eyes and follows. There's something weirdly endearing about Midoriya when he's just woken up. Shouder remembers once describing him as equal parts chatty, cheerful, creepy, and vicious, and early morning Midoriya is none of those things. He's quiet, and was quiet even back during training camp before everything went wrong. He's good-natured but not excessively cheery, and it's impossible for anyone to look creepy or vicious with outrageous bedhead and pillow creases on their face. Thanks, Midoriya says, and Todoroki may not be well-versed in sign yet, but is seen that one enough to recognize it easily. It's what Izuku always says when they do this. In fact, it's all he says. Shouder only hopes they can gather the nerve to say more once Midoriya's voice comes back. A cold spot between his shoulders becomes a tickle up his spine, and Shouder rubs the back of his neck to ward off the feeling of goosebumps. He must be letting his quirk loose in his sleep again, because his room feels draftier than normal some mornings. He hopes Midoriya doesn't notice. Would he even bring it up if he did? Without further fuss, Midoriya opens the door to return to his own room, only to startle as soon as he steps outside. Hearing his sharp intake of breath, Shouder pokes his head out into the hallway. Aoyama stands just outside his own door, hem-mussed from sleep, wrapped in a robe that's just a bit too fancy for a high school dormitory. He stares at them, wide-eyed with surprise, before his face breaks out in a wide grin. "Oh ho, my goodness," Aoyama chuckles, lifting his hand to his mouth so that it looks as if he's trying to hide it, without actually hiding anything at all. "Only a weekend. You two certainly didn't waste any time. Though, don't let me interrupt anything." With a broad wink, he strides off down the hallway to the stairs, leaving Shouder wondering what any of that was supposed to mean. Oh, well. Aoyama's always been theatrical and odd. Shouder gets down to the common room before Midoriya does, though about half the rest of the class beats him there. Ida's there, of course, as well as Yororozu, Bakuga, Aoyama, Shuja, Tokuyami, Satu, Asui, and Ashida. The latter catches sight of him first and shows her teeth in a grin. "Morning, Todoroki. Did you sleep well?" Shouder blinks, vaguely surprised. "Yes." Ashida's friendly and outgoing enough that being addressed by her isn't that big of a deal, but Shouder isn't usually a target for her relentless good cheer. The grin on Ashida's face becomes teasing. "Really, now? How well?" "Like a rock." Shouder moves into the kitchen. Someone's already put coffee on, and he pours himself a cup. He's going to need it if Ashida's decided to be extra friendly today. "Sir, then you wouldn't be able to tell us anything interesting?" Ashida asks. Shouder is about to ask her to get to the point when Asua chimes in. "Mina-chan's trying to fish for gossip," she says. "You can ignore her if you want, it's none of her business." Ashida's over-exaggerated pout gets a chuckle from Yororozu and Aoyama, which Ida quickly drowns out. "Miss Tsuyu is absolutely correct," he says sternly. "It is none of our business, and Todoroki is not obligated to answer anyone's questions, and neither is neither is anyone else, provided they are being responsible about this." He shoots a quick, sidelong glance at Shouder, then concludes what consenting parties do behind closed doors is no one's business but their own. Bakugo chokes on a mouthful of coffee and slams his mug down on the counter so hard it's a miracle it doesn't break. "Nope," he bursts out. "Fuck this. Fuck all of you. Fuck everything." With that, he storms out. Ida sighs heavily and goes to clean out the abandoned mug. Shouder searches the rest of his classmates' faces for some kind of explanation as to what's going on, but no one's looking at him, and they are all desperately trying to look innocent. Midoriya comes trotting out to the kitchen only a minute later, and it only seems to make things worse. Ashida doesn't try to wheedle answers out of him, but she does sit at the table and look ready to explode. It's too early for this. Once Izuku manages to duck out of the main room and out of sight, he signs so forcefully that he nearly whacks himself in the face. "They think we'll what?" Instead of answering, Ray doubles up and laughs so hard that the lights in the common room flicker. Izuku leaps over a sweeping kick from Ida. It's a close thing. Ida doesn't use Recipro Burst to make it, but his quirk makes him wicked fast all the same. He follows up with a second kick that nearly knocks Izuku off balance, and in the blink of an eye Ida has him on the defensive. It takes the upper limits of full Cal just to stay ahead of each blow, and Izuku focuses his power and pushes at those limits as far as he dares. He springs back onto a cement platform to gain some distance, but Ida doesn't let him stay far away for long. Sparring with Ida is good for this kind of exercise. He's the only one in class who's faster than Izuku is with full cowl, and his costume is mostly tough armor, so there's some room for error. It also helps that Izuku has barely ever sparred with him before, so Ida keeps him on his toes. He's different from Todoroki, that's for sure, though maybe that's because he knows Todoroki's fighting style forwards and backwards, so any variation stands out. But Todoroki's best with ranged fighting, and that shows through even in hand-to-hand. He dodges mostly, keeps his opponents at a distance before getting in close to take them down as quickly as possible with a well-practiced throw or blows aimed at pressure points. Ida avoids close quarters too, but only because he mostly attacks with devastatingly powerful kicks, and he needs space for that. At first glance, his fighting style seems entirely unique to someone with his quirk, but the longer they spar, the more Izuku sees. That's another advantage to sparring with Ida. Izuku's learning a lot. Having Tensei close by to call out encouragement and advice doesn't hurt. Except it does hurt, but for different reasons. In a split second, Izuku sees an opening and lunges for it. It's far from perfect, being his first try, but he still manages to catch Ida by surprise with one of his own kicks, replicated with full cowl instead of engine. It's not lost on his friend. Ida takes the hit and stumbles back, and even though his face is hidden by his helmet, Izuku hears him laugh. "You got it." He holds up his hand, and the two of them pause for a breather. "I'll have to be more careful doing special moves around here. You have a good eye, Midoriya." Izuku signs a thank you, and Ida answers with an inexpert but still understandable "You're welcome." "He's right," Tensei remarks. Rei's already off on her own, imitating some of the high kicks that Ida was performing. "You have a good head for analysis. And if you get the chance, could you tell him he favors his ride a little too much? It makes his moves that much easier to predict." Izuku nods without thinking and then freezes when he sees Ida watching him. It's so easy to forget that his secret isn't a secret from everyone anymore. That there are two people in his class who won't write him off if they see him doing something odd. A deafening explosion and crack saves him from whatever might have come next. At the top of one of Cementas's high platforms, Bakugo is sharpening new techniques with his explosions. The whole class is pretty spread out. Ojiro is on another platform with a few others, apparently giving an impromptu martial arts tutorial. Others, like Uraraka, are working on quirk endurance. Still others are experimenting. Izuku can't quite tell from this distance exactly what Tokoyami is doing with Dark Shadow, but it sure does look interesting. At ground level, the teachers pick their way through the students, offering instruction and guidance wherever it's needed. "It seems All Might is here as well," Ida remarks. "Is it wise for him to be here, do you think? This area is hardly safe, what with all the volatile quirks nearby." Izuku looks at him, shocked and a bit confused. "I know," Ida sighs. "He's All Might, and it seems absurd to worry about his safety, but still. Things are different now, and he just isn't the same as what he once was. Not physically, at least. I know his heart hasn't changed and is still the same person and the same teacher we've known, but now he's..." Izuku opens his mouth to reply, but he can't figure out how to put the words in order. Ida isn't wrong, not completely, but All Might hasn't changed, not as much as everyone thinks. All Might was already like this, already weakened and frail beneath his bluster and the fumes of One for All. In the difficult months leading up to the entrance exam, Izuku trained under him in this form just as much as he did under his hero form. He's about to try to find a way to drag the words out of himself when another explosion resounds from Bakugo's platform. It's followed by cracking and then the rough scrape of broken concrete before Bakugo's voice rings out. "Get clear, it's coming down." A massive chunk of concrete, dislodged by Bakugo's latest attack, tips off the edge of the platform and goes tumbling to the ground below. Full cowl is out before Izuku looks to the spot beneath it and sees All Might standing there. He's far away, too far away to outrun gravity. But One for All hums within him, and there's a presence at his side and a hand in his, small and cold and familiar. "Go, Rei," he hisses and pushes a thread of his power out of himself and into her. She flies, and no one else sees how she shoots through the air like an arrow from a bow and cannons into the falling concrete in midair. It's almost as big as Izuku is, but Rei hits it hard enough to shift its trajectory so that it crashes down on empty ground. All Might stumbles back, startled but unharmed. Rei perches on top of the chunk of concrete, now cracked from the impact, and grins like a pale little jack-o'-lantern. The others check on him, fuss over him, scold him gently for carelessness, but Toshinori barely hears them. All he hears is Aizawa's words, "Back again, All Might. Don't overdo it, you're still injured and it might not be safe." All he hears is Bakugo shouting from the top of the platform, "Be more careful, All Might." His hands shake, both the one hanging at his side and the one hanging in the sling. No one's told him that in a while, no one's meant it like that. Who would say something like that to All Might, of all people? Who would ever worry over All Might's safety in the face of something so silly as a little falling debris? Is this what I am now? Someone who has to be protected by others? Now, of all times, when I've only just realized a failure. How am I supposed to fix it when I can't protect even myself? How am I supposed to make it up to her when I'm this? Chapter 44. It's almost viciously anticlimactic, so much so that Shadow wonders if Midoriya didn't do it that way on purpose. It's Friday night, and the first week of boot camp is done. Much to Shadow's surprise, they actually have the weekend off, which means he'll probably be getting permission to leave campus and visit his mother at some point. It also means that the half of the class that hasn't gone to bed yet is feeling rowdy, in spite of the fact that today was no less physically taxing than the previous days. Sleepover in the common room. Ashida howls, launching a couch cushion at Zero's face. He ducks and it skims off the top of his head. Everybody grab blankets. Now wait a moment. Ida pitches his voice above the rest. We mustn't be remiss in proper rest, especially given our vigorous training. Loosen up, Ida. Kaminari laughs. Friday doesn't count as a school night. Who cares how late we stay up, as long as we can sleep in as much as we want tomorrow? That is not a healthy habit, Kaminari-kun. Eventually, some of the others, mainly Ashida, managed to wring a compromise out of Ida by promising to set themselves a special weekend curfew and then proceed to haggle him up to midnight at the earliest. Shada watches from the sidelines, amused and somewhat impressed. If the heroics thing doesn't pan out for Ashida, she could probably go into business negotiation for a living. That was pretty slick. Perhaps 11:30. Ida offers as a last-ditch effort. Either midnight or we are throwing an all-night party in Hakuchi's room, Ashida retorts. Yeah, that'll happen, Midoriya says dryly. Shado actually jumps. The entire room falls silent. Midoriya doesn't look up, just continues watching a video of a baby goat on his phone. Sensors and cameras, he goes on. They help enforce curfew and lights out. Plus, after today, I give most of us till maybe a quarter to midnight before we crash anyway. So. His voice cracks as he speaks, it's rough from lack of use. But he speaks. Shado feels sorry for Midoriya in the next moment when the entire class seems to scream out as one. His friend cringes a little at the noise, but still manages a shaky smile as he looks up from his phone. Uraraka and Kirishima tackle him off the couch, hugging him between them. Shado deftly swipes Midoriya's dropped phone before someone can accidentally sit on it in the commotion. Man, so he's finally talking again after, this morning, he hears Kaminari say. Who knew Todoroki was just that good with, he doesn't get any further than that, because Asua promptly tries to smother him with a pillow. Shada blinks, vaguely confused. Does Kaminari or anyone else think that he's the one who made Midoriya start talking again? That's flattering, certainly, but completely untrue. As far as he knows, Midoriya never made it a secret that his silence would eventually pass. Shada considers bringing this up, but everyone's a bit too preoccupied to care, so he shrugs to himself and sits back. Okay, how about this? Ashida says, loudly enough to be heard over the clamor. A nice, quiet game of truth or dare. Bakudo gets up and leaves. Kirishima protests, but it's no use because Bakudo's already gone. Shado is tempted to follow his example and just going by the look on Midoriya's face, is also strongly considering it. Sounds like fun. Uraraka pipes up. Hey Decker, have you ever played before? Midoriya shakes his head vigorously. First-timers have to play. Hakuchi calls out eagerly. Ida gives up on trying to discourage them and resigns himself to going along with it to supervise, presumably. With Bakudo gone, only Ashida, Zero, Kaminari, Ida, Kirishima, Midoriya, Hakuchi, and Asui are still up and about. Mika's here as well, moving from lap to lap as if testing each one for comfort. Once they are all settled in a rough circle in the middle of the floor, Mika claims her usual spot on Shada's left thigh and Pomia's until he pets her. To his right, Midoriya sees this and snickers softly under his breath. A round of nose-goes chooses Hakuchi to start the game, in spite of her protests. I totally had my finger on my nose, you guys just couldn't see it. Okay, who else hasn't played besides Midoriya, she asks. Shada raises his hand and isn't that surprised when no one else does. That's usually how it is. Okay, Todoroki. Truth or dare? Court of guard, it's all Shada can do to keep from stammering. Dare. Judging by the direction of her sleeve, it looks like she's tapping her chin in thought. Pick someone else in the game. Just point to them. Why? You'll find out when you pick. Oh. Shada does a quick sweep of the circle. Ida. He's not sure what this is about, but Ida's usually a safe choice. Okay then. For a moment he could swear that Hagakia sounds slightly disappointed. I dare you to tell Ida something you privately think about him, but have never said out loud. Are a lot of the things is privately thought about Ida tie back to what happened in Hosa and legal gag orders trump sleepover games? For a few moments Shouder racks his brain until he finally settles upon one that seems fairly safe. He turns to Ida, who looks faintly nervous. Your right hook is atrocious, he says. You should probably work on that. That gets a ripple of muffled laughter, and even Ida cracks a sheepish grin. If it happens to leave their classmates desperately wondering when and why Ida punched him at some point, well, answering that wasn't part of the dare. The game continues from there. Ida picks truth, and Shoudo asks him what happens if water gets into his engines, which prompts a long-winded explanation that teaches Shoudo far more about metal oxidation than he ever knew before. He bears witness to Ashida getting tickled, learns that Asue has in fact tripped over her tongue before, and watches Kaminari inexpertly apply a coat of lipstick on Sira. It's all very silly, but Shoudo can see why this kind of thing is so popular. It's fun in a weird way. Enough for him to forget that he's tired from a week of non-stop training. It's loose and carefree, and if there is some tension over dares and awkward questions, it's all very low pressure. Midoriya-chan Asue sing-songs a few rounds in. She's sitting upside down on the couch, her long hair dangling toward the carpet, and she's not allowed to move from that position for the next 5 turns. Truth or dare? No, truth, Midoriya answers and seems to brace himself. I pick truth. Asue purses her lips. To Shoudo's surprise, Ida and Uraraka lean forward as if they are interested in what she's about to say. How come you keep falling asleep on people, she asks. You always look really tired, and you always say you don't sleep very well, so how come you can sleep on other people instead? Midoriya relaxes. Oh. That. It's safe. Asue cocks her head, which looks strange when she's upside down. It's safe? Shoudo remembers having this conversation with him way back at the start of the forest camp. It still seems strange for him to say that when Shoudo's pretty sure Midoriya falls asleep on him more than anyone else. There has to be more to it. Ah, yeah. Midoriya fidgets in his spot. I can't sleep if I don't feel safe, and it feels safer around some people than it does when I'm by myself at night. In the dark. Having weird dreams. Oh, man, Midoriya, Kirishima looks like he's about to cry. Are you saying you feel safe with us? I mean, yes. Uraraka's sitting on Midoriya's other side and pulls him into a hug. You guys know what this means. Hagakia says thoughtfully. Midoriya must feel safest around Todoroki, then. Shoudo turns to stare at her. Yeah, I bet, Kaminari says, straight-faced. Ashida giggles. Midoriya's face is red with embarrassment. There's nothing wrong with that, he says quietly. So what if I do? Shoudo turns to stare at him, shocked. Wait, what? Why? He had assumed he was an exception, or maybe an oversight, but that wouldn't explain why Midoriya's looking at him like that's the dumbest question he could have asked. Oh, for the love of, Ashida snorts. Midoriya, can I go next? Sure. Midoriya leaves off staring at Shoudo, looking a bit rattled. Truth or dare? Ashida speeds through her turn with the revelation that for her entire middle school growth spurt her horns were too big for her to wear pullover tops, and then turns to Shoudo with a look of determination. Todoroki. Truth or dare? He doesn't like that look. That's the kind of look that promises an awkward question that he'll answer and reveal far more information than he would like. Better to play it safe. Dare, he says, and realizes he's misjudged it when Ashida's dark eyes light up with triumph. I dare you to kiss Midoriya, she bursts out. And no pecking him on the cheek like he's your grandmother, it's gotta be a lip lock. What? Midoriya's voice cracks. Shoudo's too busy gaping at her to form a response. Izuku is very, very glad that Hino cleared off as soon as the game started and dragged Tensei out with him. He's gaping at Todoroki and then at Ashida, hoping his panic doesn't show on his face. He doesn't have much to hope for if Uraraka's muffled giggle is any indication. Ray's no help, she's too busy laughing too. Don't be shy, guys. Kaminari calls out encouragingly. I mean, it's nothing we haven't figured out already. Ayama even saw you guys come out of the same bedroom this morning, so it's no big deal. It's not like that, Izuku says weakly. He can't help feeling a little trapped. If he explains, then he'll inevitably have to say he and Todoroki were sleeping together, and he has a feeling that would only dig them deeper. Flustered, he looks to Todoroki for help, but his friend is every bit as helpless looking as he is. We shouldn't make our classmates do things they don't want to. Ida interjects. Ah, dude, that's kind of the whole point of truth or dare, Zero points out. You do know that, right? Look, I know what it looks like, Izuku says. But you've got it wrong. I mean, remember the question I just answered? About sleeping. It was just that. We were just sharing a room. That's a much safer way to put it. Not as many incriminating connotations. Wait, Todoroki speaks up for the first time. What did you think we were doing? A hush falls over the rest of his classmates. A few meaningful glances are exchanged. Oh, you sweet summer child, Kaminari whispers. Ashida sighs heavily, and Izuku strongly suspects that she doesn't completely believe them. Well, what's a kiss on the lips between friends, as she asks. I've done it before, loads of times. But it's not like that, Izuku wants to repeat, except, is it? His intentions were innocent, and he knows that Todoroki's were too, but they've been sharing a bed lately. Izuku can't imagine himself doing that with anyone who isn't Todoroki. Not even with Uraraka or Ida. He's not sure why, it'd just be weird, somehow. Falling asleep on people's shoulders is one thing, but he and Todoroki moved past that point a while ago. Does that make the others right? Has he had feelings for Todoroki this whole time that were so secret that even he didn't know they were there? How did he just not notice that? How? Todoroki nudges him, and Izuku jumps. You're muttering again, he says. Sorry, Izuku says automatically. It's not a bad thing, Todoroki assures him. You just haven't done it out loud in a while. They are sitting right up against each other, and Izuku's never had a problem being this close, but now he feels hyper-aware of every spot where they are touching. His face feels hot. Is this what a crush is supposed to feel like? Is he reading too much into it? He's taking too long. Listen, it's my dare, not yours, Todoroki tells him. There's probably some rule about not dragging other people into it if it's not their turn, right? Lan. Kaminari calls out, only to falter when Asui turns to look him dead in the eye. You're kind of being a Manada right now, she says. There's a chorus of groans and uncomfortable laughter. Asui, too soon, Kaminari says weakly. That diffuses the tension just a bit, enough that Izuku can shrug the rest off. It's fine, he says, sounding just a bit more confident than he feels. He shifts so that it's easier to turn and face Todoroki. On the count of 3. Sure, Todoroki says. 1, 2. He moves in, but Izuku also moves in at the same time, and they crash clumsily in the middle. Izuku's aim is off, and he ends up smashing his lower lip between his teeth and Todoroki's chin. Ow. Sorry, hold on. Todoroki reaches up to hold Izuku's jaw steady, and the second attempt is slightly more successful in that their lips are now connected with a low chance of drawing blood by accident. It's colder than expected. Partly because of Todoroki's quirk, and partly because someone has spit on their lips and Izuku can't tell which. So it's a little wetter than he would have liked, but they are here. This is a kiss, probably. Now what? Logically, Izuku knows it's only been a second or so, but is something else supposed to happen? Should there be movement? What comes next? Or is a kiss just supposed to be two people connected at the mouth, trying not to breathe too hard on each other? He starts to ask, panics, and starts opening his mouth without pulling back first. To make matters worse, Todoroki starts to shift his position, and Izuku ends up lipping him by accident. Which just adds even more moisture to the whole mess, and yeah, this dare is over. Izuku jerks back, spitting out Todoroki's lower lip in the process. He wipes his mouth on the back of his hand, scooting back to his original position so quickly he almost crashes into Uraraka. Rei is gone, but Izuku can hear her howling with merriment in the next room. Was that good enough? Todoroki asks. For a moment, Ashida doesn't answer. She's too busy staring at the two of them as if her entire worldview has been thrown into question. That was literally the worst kiss I've ever seen, Sira remarks. But it was a kiss, right? Todoroki asks. Is it my turn now? You okay, Midoriya-chan? Asui asks. How was it? Izuku blinks. Logically he knows he doesn't have to answer, it's not like he's taking a truth turn. But still, this is the kind of thing people are supposed to be able to describe, right? Holy shit, that was his first kiss. It tasted like mouth, he says. The game has to pause a moment so that Sira, Kaminari, and Hagakure can stop laughing. Midoriya proves correct. By 11:45, Sira has fallen asleep on one of the couches and most of the rest are nodding off. It's easier now for Ida to gently herd everyone upstairs in spite of Ashido's sleepy protests. Midoriya takes the stairs, as always, he's the first one out of the room, and for a moment Shouder considers following him. He's not entirely sure what just happened. He's pretty sure it wasn't a bad thing, though he's been wrong before. Midoriya didn't seem angry or even all that upset, just thoroughly embarrassed. Still, it feels like something he ought to follow up on, without the others watching and listening. For his part, Shouder knows he feels something about it. The problem is that he's pretty sure he's feeling several things, all tangled up within him and so hopelessly snarled that he's at a loss to name any one of them. He doesn't see Midoriya again before he gets to his room and gets ready for bed. He wonders if this will be another night spent sharing a room. There's a knock at the door. Well, that answers that question. Shouder answers it. It's not Midoriya, it's Ida, looking sheepish and apologetic. Oh. Hello, Todoroki. Ida shifts from foot to foot. Sorry to disturb you, just. I wanted to apologize for earlier. Oh. Shouder blinks, thoroughly befuddled. What for? For not. Ida's hands twist together. You and Midoriya were forced into an uncomfortable situation. Regardless of the gain, it was thoroughly inappropriate for the others to pressure you two into doing something you weren't comfortable with. I should have spoken up and put a stop to it, but I was remiss. I hope you can forgive me. It's fine, Shouder says. It's not a big deal, really. Ida gives him a pained smile. Still, I ought to have asserted myself better, but the whole thing spiraled out of my control, somewhat. It's not always your responsibility, Shouder points out. We are outside of school hours. You can't watch over us all the time. His friend laughs softly. Well, I can certainly try, now that on-campus housing is in effect. Shouder shakes his head. You'll only run yourself ragged. The door to the right opens and Midoriya slips out with Mika at his feet. He closes his door and steps toward Shouder's, only to stop short at the side of Ida. His eyes flicker to the sides, as if taking in more than Shouder can say. Upon seeing him, Ida turns a bit pink at the ears and backs away. Midoriya. I wanted to apologize for not coming to your defense earlier when the others. It's fine, Midoriya interrupts. I mean, it wasn't bad, just awkward and kind of embarrassing. But we are good. Well, I'm good. I'm good too, Shouder adds. Everything's fine, Midoriya concludes, fidgeting a little. If it's not fine, I'll let you know if you can help, to promise. Right. Good night, then. I'll leave you two to. He glances between them and his ears go a bit pinker. Shouder heaves a sigh. He's starting to see where people's thoughts are taking them. Ida, no, Midoriya says, a bit desperately. I swear it isn't like that, I just want to talk to him, that's all. We're not. It's none of my business either way, Ida says. It's something private, whatever it is, so I'll leave you to it. Just don't stay up too late, even if it is the weekend, there's no need to form bad habits, and you'll only regret it come Monday when it's harder to get up in the morning. Yes, Mother, Midoriya says dryly, which startles a laugh out of their friend. It really is good to have you back, Midoriya, he says. Good night, both of you. With that, he leaves them. Mika is already sliding past Shouder's ankles as Midoriya approaches. Can we talk, he asks. Shouder nods and lets him in. Do we need to talk? Shouder asks after he's closed the door behind him. If this is about earlier, I'm fine with pretending it didn't happen if you were. He hesitates, wondering if that was the wrong thing to say. What if Midoriya doesn't agree? No. I mean, yes, we need to talk. Midoriya paces a little. It's sort of about that. But not completely. I've been wanting to talk to you for kind of a while. It's about, He gestures vaguely between them and the futon laid out on the floor. This whole thing. Shadow feels his heart sink, heavy with dread. Oh. It's nothing bad. Midoriya says quickly. At least, I don't think so. I don't. I mean, it was sort of embarrassing, people jumping to conclusions like that, but I don't want to stop doing this, I mean. He stares at the floor and fidgets. They think we are together, don't they? Shadow says, and knows he's right when Midoriya cringes. They think we are in a relationship. Midoriya nods. Pretty much. And Kaminari seems to, well, never mind Kaminari. This is not a conversation to be had while standing. With another sigh, Shadow goes and sits on his futon, because that's the most comfortable place in his room at the moment. After a moment's hesitation, Midoriya joins in. Are we? Shadow asks. Huh? Are we in a relationship? He finishes and feels a very strange urge to chew on his own tongue as he says it out loud. I mean, is that what this is? Midoriya's groan is muffled because he's hiding his face in his hands. That's kind of what's been bugging me, he says, dragging his fingers down to his chin. I mean, it's not, because neither of us ever said it, and I'm pretty sure you're supposed to communicate that kind of thing, but I don't know. Are we supposed to be? What do you mean by supposed to be? It comes out harsher than he intends, and he shuts his mouth before he can snap again. Midoriya blinks at him, bewildered, and then his eyes widen. Oh, no, I didn't mean it like that, I'm sorry. I forgot about, your mother, he doesn't say. I didn't mean as supposed to like we have to and don't have a choice, we sleep in the same bed, and I've told you things I haven't really told other people, and I think you do the same. So I wonder if this all adds up to what the others think. I just wonder if they're right, that's all. I don't really care about what the others think, Shadow points out. Do you even want to? Midoriya doesn't answer right away, and that's a problem. Because Shadow realizes that Midoriya's answer, whatever it is really going to matter to him. It makes him dread hearing it at the same time as it makes him desperate to hear it. Midoriya meets his eyes, and Shadow sees his own helpless confusion reflected in his friend's face. No. I don't think I do. Shadow breathes out, and he only notices the knot in his chest when it loosens. He feels as if he could physically sag. It's not disappointment. It's relief. Midoriya gives a rough, frustrated groan and flops backward onto the soft comforter. Mika makes herself comfortable on his stomach. But it's just that makes everything more confusing, because then I don't know what this is. Shadow blinks at him. Friendship. Midoriya barks out a humorless laugh. I'm friends with Ida. I'm friends with Uraraka. And Kirishima. And Asui, sometimes. But I wouldn't crawl into bed with any of them. Would you? Shadow considers this. Ida is a great friend. He feels a little closer to Uraraka than he was before Kamina. Yaoyorosa's fantastic. But is closest to Midoriya. He always has been. It feels different, stronger, somehow. I wouldn't, he agrees. But then, what does that make us? I don't know, Midoriya sighs. I like you. I really, really like you. Just not the way they think I do. Not the way people talk about. Shadow lies back, his head hitting the pillow. Midoriya's head is about level with his elbow. He can feel his friend's hair tickling his arm. What weighs that? Oh, you know, Midoriya says with a shrug. Butterflies in your stomach. Sparks when you touch. Kissing. Stuff like that. People go crazy for that stuff, but I just don't. I never really have. And sometimes I'm not sure, sometimes it feels like I might be feeling like that, but it always goes away so fast and I realize it wasn't a crush, I was just embarrassed and awkward. And now with this, it's like I can't tell if it's supposed to be friendship or not because I didn't have any friends before I came here, so I'm always second-guessing myself and I'm just never sure about anything. Oh, Shadow says. Oh. Midoriya is covering his face, his elbows bent upward. Is that all you have to say? Sorry, Shadow says. I'm just relieved, I guess. Why are you relieved? Because you're just as confused about this as I am, and for pretty much the same reasons. Midoriya snorts with laughter. You were my first friend, Shadow says, and Midoriya goes quiet. So, even though I don't feel like this about any of the others, I've always figured that was the reason. Well, if it helps, I don't feel like this for my first friend, Midoriya says wryly. Shadow's first thought is you're a raga, but then he remembers. You and Bakugo were friends when you were younger, weren't you? Guess so. Midoriya runs his fingers through his cat's fur. Anyway, it's just weird. I've been sort of wondering this already, and then tonight happened and I'm even more confused because it feels like everyone else knows more about this than I do, so I just wonder if they're right and we should be dating or whatever. You said you didn't want to, Shadow points out. And neither do I, so let's not. What do you want to do? Because I'm fine with this. I don't need any more than this. Depends on what this is. Midoriya slings his arm over his eyes with a sigh. Looking out for each other, Shadow says. Sharing things. Sleeping like this if we need to. We should spar again, too, I've missed that. He turns his head, angling it downward so he can see Midoriya. What about you? What do you want? The same, I guess, Midoriya says. Hope you're okay with me falling asleep on you, because that's probably gonna keep happening. And that's another thing, Shadow says in a slightly strangled voice. Why the hell do you feel safe with me? Midoriya's elbow jabs him in the side. Hey, it's your own fault. You're the one who keeps showing up whenever I'm in mortal danger. My mistake, Shadow says dryly and gets jabbed again. Besides, Midoriya says after a moment. It's not just physical safety. It's more like, well. How do you feel when I started talking again? Be honest. Shadow blinks, surprised by the question. I was glad. It means you're feeling better. Healing. Not much besides that. I'm not that good at sign, but you're good at making yourself understood. See? It's stuff like that. He says it as if that clears it right up, but it doesn't. I don't follow, Shadow admits. Everyone's so relieved and it's such a big deal, and Midoriya's voice catches. Even just now. Good to have you back, Midoriya, as if I've been gone this entire time just because I wasn't talking. And I know he didn't mean it like that, it's just they get worried all the time when I do stuff like that. His frustration is nearly palpable. I do things that aren't pretty, they don't look nice or sound nice, because they help me deal with things and get through stuff like that, and everyone looks at me like they're scared for me and it just makes me want to hide that stuff so they'll stop looking at me like that. Shadow finds, to his vague surprise, that his hand has found Midoriya's shoulder. But you don't look at me like that, Midoriya says. You started learning sign just to talk to me. Do you even know how much that meant to me? I'm not that good. Midoriya reaches up to pat his elbow. That's okay, I'll help you. It's not like this is never going to happen again, anyway. He takes a deep breath and lets it out again. You always do stuff like this. I don't know if it's because you're the same way or you know what it's like, it just makes me feel like I'm normal. You make perfect sense to me, Shadow answers, because he isn't sure what else to say to that. Thanks, Midoriya says softly. He doesn't go back to his own room. Izuku is out of excuses. His voice is back, he's surrounded by friends, his secret is slightly less of one than it was before, and Ido lives just upstairs. There's no reason not to talk to him, to tell him the truth, the full truth, the truth that Izuku knows but Mom doesn't and therefore Ido doesn't. But he keeps quiet, because he's a coward, and because Ido is too polite to ask. Tensei pulls him aside on Saturday, because apparently it's gotten obvious or Ray told him more, doesn't matter. Maybe Tensei's noticed because Izuku has been avoiding him, too. You don't have to, Tensei tells him. You know that, right? Because at the end of the day it's your quirk, and Tenya found out by accident anyway. You don't owe anyone anything. Except Izuku can read between the lines. He can hear the hesitance and reluctance in Tensei's voice. He can read the way he says you don't have to instead of don't do it. Because Tensei is selfless and kind, like any true hero should be, and he'd never try to force Izuku to do something he doesn't want to. But Tensei wants it. He wants his brother to know. And deep down, Izuku wants to tell him, if only to free himself from the prickling, choking guilt of his own silence. But every time he tries, every time he even thinks about trying, he might as well be mute again. On Sunday, he sets up his game system in the common room. They have permission in that Aizawa didn't include video games in the comprehensive list of things they were not allowed to do in the dorms, and Izuku figures it's easier to ask forgiveness if it comes to that. He has no other obligations. Most of his classmates are out or with family. Todoroki's gone most of the day to visit his mother. Even Ida himself goes home, so there's a bit less guilt about avoiding him. He's played Journey more times than he can count, because it's easily the most low-stress, calming game he's ever played, and that's what he needs right now. Ray plays with Mika on the floor. All in all, it's a quiet afternoon. Around 1:30, he hears footsteps coming, and the cushion sag beside him. "Hey, Deku," Uraraka says. Izuku grins at her. "Hey. What's up?" "Nothing much," she says. "Kind of bored. Almost everybody's gone, so." "Yeah." He pauses the game. "Wanna play?" "Sure. This is Journey, right? Everybody says it's good." Izuku hands her the controller and gives her a rundown of the premise and all the controls. Uraraka picks it up quickly and spends the next 10 minutes just exploring the landscape, sending her character leaping over sand and ruins. "Hey Deku," she says after a while. "Yeah? Are there any ghosts in here right now?" Izuku jumps. She knows, he knows that she knows, and technically they've sort of talked about it before, but this is the first time she's really asked. Yeah. Just one. Her name's Ray." "Cool. Hi, Ray." Uraraka can't see the way Ray banes. "What's she like?" "She was a 9, he says. "It was a while ago. But she's the girl you saw." "Oh." Uraraka stops playing and lowers the controller. "She was in a drawing you made when you were little, right?" "I met her when I was 5, Izuku says. "She's been with me ever since." "Do they always do that?" Uraraka asks. "Stick around." "Sometimes. Not usually. Most ghosts have better things to do than hang around me." "Like what?" Izuku sits back on the couch, shifting over as Ray hops up to sit next to him. "Move on most of the time. Or if they do stay, they follow people they actually knew when they were alive." "Oh," Ochako says. Does anyone we know have ghosts like that?" Izuku feels his heartbeat in his throat. "Yeah. Do you ever feel like you want to tell them?" His throat feels uncomfortably thick. "Sometimes it's all I can think about." She isn't going to ask, he realizes. She's going to dance around it unless he says something first. "Have you ever tried?" she asks. She isn't playing anymore. The robed figure stands motionless in the sand, and Uraraka's eyes are on Izuku. "Yes," Izuku says. "It was a long time ago, and they didn't have a ghost. I told them because, well, at the time, it felt like I had to, and I might as well." He swallows, but the hard lump in his throat remains. "It didn't go well. Deku. And ever since then," he says. "Ever since then, every time I think about telling, every time I find someone and think, maybe they'll understand, maybe it'll be okay this time, I think of what happened the first time. And I just can't. It won't come out, no matter how much I want to, or how much they deserve to know." His eyes sting. "That's why you and Ida only found out on accident, and even though you know now and it's fine, even though I should know better, it's still hard just to think about. Like if I say too much or I push too hard, it'll go wrong again." "Well, maybe it's because we found out on accident," Uraraka says. "What?" "You didn't get to face your fears," she says. It just happened while you weren't even there. Maybe you're still scared of what will happen if you tell, because you still don't know what will happen if you tell. She's smart, Ray says. You should listen to her. I guess that makes sense. Izuku can't help smiling a little, though his mouth slips into a frown again shortly. Doesn't tell me what I should do about it, though. Tell someone, Uraraka says, as if it's really that simple. She must see the look on his face, because she presses further. I mean, not just anyone. Tell someone you know is going to accept it. Someone you trust. Someone you feel safest with, no matter what. Izuku goes tense. You saying I should tell? She raises both hands, one of them still holding the game controller. I only said what I said. If someone popped into your head while I said it, then that's on you, not me. Ray gestures vigorously at her. She's right. Listen to her. She's smarter than you, do it. Izuku gives Uraraka his most wounded look. You should know that Ray is siding with you, and that means you're both gaining up on me, and that's totally unfair. Smiling primly, Uraraka goes back to playing. Thank goodness you've had someone sensible with you all these years. Izuku snorts, but doesn't argue with her. Monday's training is every bit as vigorous as the week before, but by now they're used to it. Izuku starts his own training off with Ray. He's getting better at this. When he first tried it, it felt vague and nebulous, something he could perform without completely comprehending what he was doing. But now, he's starting to internalize the feeling. It's something he can possibly quantify, which means it's something he can master and improve. Of course, that means he has to stop eventually. He knows it's time to take a break when he sees Sierra blink and do a double take in his direction. His heart seizes, but then his classmate shakes his head as if to clear it, shrugs, and goes back to his own exercises. This is kind of counterproductive, he murmurs to Ray. We are trying to work out special moves, but even if I figure this out, I'll still have nothing I can show for it. When she looks put upon, he shoots her a glare. Hey, besides, I can't just rely on you to help me all the time. I need to work things out just for myself, too. She floats up and pinches his nose, then flounces off to bother Hina. From there, Izuku trains with one for all alone. His best bet, as far as he knows, is to keep increasing his capacity to wield it. The fast he reaches higher percentages, the fast he can work out some proper moves with it. Maybe even ranged attacks with wind pressure, the way All Might does. Speaking of All Might, Izuku goes looking for him and finds him apparently deep in conversation with Ojira. They seem busy, and it doesn't look as if they'll finish up quickly, so he signals Nana instead. When she catches sight of him, she waves back and comes to join him at the foot of one of Cementas's raised platforms. Most of his classmates are elsewhere. Tokoyami's wielding Dark Shadow on top of the platform with some of the overhead lights dimmed, and that's enough to make everyone keep their distance. Out of sight and earshot from most of the others, Izuku feels safer talking to her without raising any eyebrows. She seems distracted as she joins him, glancing over her shoulder even as she pays attention to Izuku. Everything all right, he asks. I'll get back to you on that, Beansprout, she says. What's up? Same as usual. Just, do you think there's anything I can do besides grinding in order to take on more of one for all at a time, he asks. Depends, she says, with one last look over her shoulder. Where are you at this point? I started out at 5%, and I think by now I'm around 6 or 7, he says. So. Steady progress, but slower than I'd like. If it takes me a full term to go up by 2, then by the time I graduate, I'll be at, 23%. That's less than a quarter, that's nothing. Nana puts her hand on his head before he can work up his frustration. Hey, slow your roll, Tater-tot, your growth isn't going to be a steady slope, okay? There'll be peaks and curves. This was your first term, and yeah, it was an intense term, but you've been finding your footing. You just need some clear goals in mind. So what, exactly, do you want out of one for all in your immediate future? And don't say increased power output, because that's obvious. What's something specific that you want to be able to do with it? He thinks for a moment. Ranged attacks, he says. I'm good in close quarters, but I can't attack from a distance unless I send a ghost or injure myself. Great. Nana claps her hands. Now, in my day I needed a bare minimum of 32% for a half-decent wind pressure shot. Tosh needed around 25-ish. You? I'd say your magic number's 20. Izuku suppresses a sigh. That's still more than 10% to go. Fucking move, dumbass. A hand closes on his upper arm, so tight it's painful, and drags. Izuku's first instinct is to fight, before Nana looks up, flickers, and starts shoving him back as well. He follows her gaze just in time to see dark shadow finish slicing off a corner of the platform. The rebel crashes to the ground where he'd been standing just moments before. Izuku can't move. It's not that he's that shocked that Tokoyami nearly sent him to Recovery Girl, but more the fact that Bakugo still hasn't let go of his arm, and it's starting to hurt. Are you fucking brain dead, Deku? Bakugo snarls. What the fuck were you just standing there for? Let go, Izuku murmurs. It's hard to shout when he has to consciously think about breathing. Then fucking pay attention next time. Shitty hair was yelling his ass off at you and you stood there like a fucking moron. What's the matter, are you deaf on top of? Bakugo, Izuku says. Let go of me. Are you even listening to? Izuku clicks his teeth together, hard enough to feel the click in his whole jaw. It's not meant to be a threat, just a sound and sensation to drive back the growing static in his head, but Bakugo releases him roughly anyway. Thanks, he says tightly, and steps out of reach before Bakugo can grab him again. The static recedes. Thanks for the warning. He hurries away with Nana hovering over him, dimly aware of Rei rushing back to his side. Sorry, Nana murmurs to him. I'm sorry, I should have been paying attention, so I could warn you, but I was distracted and... It's fine, he says. He feels Bakugo's eyes on him as he hurries away. Does All Might seem off to you? Todoroki asks. Yes, Izuku says bluntly. Why wouldn't he? You wanted to talk to him earlier, right? Todoroki says. I saw you looking at him a few times, but you never went up to him. Yeah, what are you getting at? It feels like it's harder to talk to him now, Todoroki admits. He seems more fragile now than he used to. He's not, Izuku says. Todoroki's sitting at the foot of the futon and is too limp and comfortable to get up and reach him, but Izuku can still jab him in the side with his foot. This form of his isn't new, you know that, right? He's been that way for years, it's just that now he can't hide it anymore. Todoroki swats his foot away. It's not so much how he looks, he says. That's part of it, but it feels like something's wrong past just surface level. He just seems unhappy. Izuku purses his lips, worried. Todoroki's not wrong, of course. All Might has been making him feel cautious lately. He just figured that it was taking All Might some time to get used to being quirkless again, but there could be more to it. That villain, all for one, Todoroki says, and there's a hint of caution to it. You were there for a little while with him and All Might. Did they say anything? Plenty, Izuku says. That's why I don't blame All Might for acting off. But he runs his hand through his hair. I did run before they finished. He might have said something between that point and when All Might took him down. He hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about All Might, that's the problem. He's used to Nana letting him know if All Might's in trouble, but, well, she seemed off, too. Besides asking Izuku to humor him when All Might first showed up for training, she hasn't said much to him. All for One was the one that killed her, he reminds himself. Who even knows how it felt to her, seeing him in the flesh again? His tongue itches to mention that, but of course he can't, not to Todoroki. Except he could, couldn't he? Someone you trust, Uraraka had said. Someone you feel safest with, no matter what. He'll sleep on it. As it happens, he does sleep right in that spot, lying on Todoroki's futon. He didn't go in meaning to sleep there, but is tired from training, tired from worrying about All Might and Nana and Bakugo and who knows what else. It's criminally easy to fall asleep around Todoroki. He'll have to be more careful in the future. It's not enough to keep the nightmares back, but at least they go easy on him tonight. He doesn't dream of All for One or Toga or Dabi. He doesn't dream of Compress's marble prisons. He dreams of the closet, of hands holding him in a tight grip, only releasing him as the door shuts and cuts off his escape, of whispers and cold fingers touching him, even when he struggles. He dreams of the crawling horror in the darkness, one that he can hear and feel but never quite say. He's had this dream more times than he can count. It's his oldest nightmare by far. It may very well follow him to the grave. When he wakes up, there are hands gripping him again, and he struggles on instinct before he registers that one is hot and the other is cold. Mika noses at his face, and Todoroki releases him before he can work himself up into a proper panic. "You all right?" There's a hand in his hair. "Midoriya." Izuku sits up. The light flickers on, Rei standing by the switch. Todoroki jerks his head up, frowning in confusion. "That's odd," he says. "Must be something wrong with the wiring." The hand that was in Izuku's hair now rests firmly on his shoulder. "Not that I'm complaining." "You all right?" Izuku nods wordlessly, but doesn't lie back down. He curls into a tight ball, knees pressed firmly to his chest, and tucks his head in as he waits for the fear to pass. It's not immediate. "Might help to talk, if you're up for it," Todoroki says softly, but when Izuku doesn't answer, he doesn't press. Eventually, Izuku takes a deep breath, heaves himself to his feet, and goes to switch the lights back off. At the very least, he tries. Rei stands in his way and scowls at him. Izuku glares back, then steps around her and hits the switch. He realizes, then, that he can't blame it on faulty wiring. Too late, he thinks as he returns to the futon. Maybe he won't ask. He isn't wrong. That's not what Todoroki asks at all. So Todoroki begins hesitantly as Izuku sits back down. Is Kaken a person, or? Izuku freezes. It's just, Todoroki continues when Izuku doesn't reply. This isn't the first time I've heard you say it. It's not that you say it a lot, it's been maybe 3 times. I was just wondering if it meant something to you. Whenever you do, you sort of lash out when I try to touch you. Someone you trust. Someone you feel safest with. He opens his mouth and shuts it again. The closet and the crawling and the hands and the whispers are still fresh in his mind, brought back to the front of it by fear and nightmares. What if, he thinks? What if it goes wrong again? What if he doesn't believe me? He blinks and is surprised when tears fall. A shiver runs through him as he tries to wipe them away. You don't have to answer that, Todoroki tells him. What if he does? Izuku blinks the wet glow from his eyes and sees Rei standing in the dark just a few feet away. Waiting. He opens his mouth. It's a long story. His voice cracks. And there are things that... The closet is there, in the forefront of his mind, tattooed into the backs of his eyelids. He wouldn't. Todoroki wouldn't. No one could, even if they wanted to. There's no closet here. The entire room is a wet, dark blur now. What would you say, Izuku begins, if I told you that I've been lying about some things? That, his voice catches, his throat closes as if it would rather strangle him than let him speak. That my quirk isn't what you think it is. The silence that passes is almost enough to kill his courage. What do you mean? Todoroki asks warily. What if I told you that I see things? Izuku goes on, before he can lose heart completely. People that no one else can see, or hear, or touch. He can't look at Todoroki, so he looks at Rei instead. They talk to me. Sometimes they tell me things. Sometimes they ask for help. And he has to choke out the rest. And sometimes they tell me how they died. Silence. Izuku waits. He can't be sure how long he waits, because he can't be sure of the passage of time at all. His mind slows things down, and every heartbeat feels like hours passing. It's bullshit, right, he says, before Todoroki can say it first. It's stupid bullshit and impossible, and I'm a liar. The sad thing is that he is a liar, just not right now. He waits, swallowing as his heartbeat pulses in his throat, waits and waits and waits until finally. You know, that's what I thought you were going to say. He jumps at the sound of Todoroki's voice and forces himself to look. What? Todoroki's eyes don't flash in the dark like his, but Izuku can still see his friend watching him. When I told you about my father and what kind of person he is behind closed doors. That was mostly for me, not you. Because I didn't think you'd believe me. What? Izuku's voice cracks. He's still sort of crying, he isn't sobbing and breathless, but his throat aches and the tears haven't stopped yet. I don't, why wouldn't I? You like heroes, Todoroki says. Even before I knew you, I knew that. An endeavor is the second strongest. I didn't think you'd believe what I said about him. He glances down at his hands, twisted together in his lap. And then you did. You didn't even question it. Izuku blinks and wipes his eyes again. It hadn't occurred to him at the time that Todoroki might be lying. He met Endeavor shortly afterward, but he hadn't needed to. So I guess if you could take my side when we weren't even friends, when I challenging you in front of everyone, then it'd be hypocritical of me to call you a lie now. He pauses. It's kind of a lot, what you're implying. But I think that just makes me believe you more. The leaden weight is fading, losing density, until Izuku can almost start to breathe again. What do you mean? I've seen you lie before, I think, Todoroki continues. When you say you're fine even when you're not. Or you brush off someone questioning something. All the times I've seen you do it, it's to make people stop asking questions and stop paying attention to you. This is only making me pay more attention. Izuku's crying again. He's not sure if he'll ever stop. So I guess, to answer your question, Todoroki says. I'd say that we have a classmate with a shadow demon living inside him, and we just watched our teacher fight a centuries-old supervillain who could steal quirks. So we can't really define what's impossible, can we? Izuku grabs a handful of Todoroki's shirt and drags him into a hug. He can apologize for smearing snot and tears on his chest later. Todoroki says when Izuku's last crying fit starts to subside and is lost track of how long they've been sitting here on Todoroki's futon. So you see ghosts? Izuku nods into his chest. Actual dead ghosts? There isn't really another kind, Izuku croaks. Does anyone else know? Ida and Uraraka, he answers. I didn't tell them, they found out when they visited my mom while I was gone. But you're the first, he stops. You're the second person I've ever told, outside of my family. The question is inevitable, of course. Who was the first? Reluctantly, Izuku lets go of him and leans back, wiping the dampness from his face. He's tired and a little thirsty from crying, and part of him wants to burrow under blankets and never wake up again. But he can answer this last question. After all, he still hasn't answered the first. I had this friend. The closet is back, but it's not in his face anymore. It's not blinding him. The fear can't touch him anymore because he's past what would have frightened him, and it never came to pass. Maybe we weren't really friends. I don't think he really liked me that much, looking back. But we went to the same elementary school. He had so many friends and I didn't, except for him. I didn't tell people about what I could do. My mom tried to hint at it to doctors when I was little, but they were never very, open to the idea. There wasn't any way for us to prove that what I saw was real. So nobody knew about it. He takes a deep breath. In elementary school, down the hall from homeroom, there was this closet. I don't remember what it was for. I just remember that I hated that closet. I hated it more than anything, and believe me, I hated a lot of stuff about school back then. But that closet was the worst, because I could hear things in it. And nobody else could, so I knew it had to be ghosts, but I never saw them. I don't know if they ever came out. All I know is that they were dead, and they were angry. They were already there when I first got there, and they were there when I left, and they never stopped screaming, not once. He feels like he should cry here, but he doesn't. He's already out of tears. They are probably still there, even now. Todoroki doesn't interrupt, not even to ask questions. Izuku is grateful for that. The shortest way to the cafeteria was by walking past that closet, Izuku says. I took the long way around all the time, so I wouldn't have to go near it. I tried to be sneaky about it, but people noticed. Keikaka noticed. And he asked me why I went the stupid way around. He pauses, but Todoroki still says nothing. So I told him. Izuku's voice cracks. Not right away. I thought about it a lot. And I thought we were friends, we'd known each other since we were tiny, so I thought it'd be okay. Izuku swallows, but his throat and mouth are dry. He didn't believe me. He hears Todoroki exhale, but his friend still waits for him to finish. He thought I was lying. Pretending I had a quirk so they'd stop teasing me about it. So he thought it'd be funny to again, he has to stop. He's dimly aware of Ray sitting beside him, hugging his arm, and Mika climbing into his lap and kneading at his thigh until the words come out in a rush. He got his friends. And I was yelling the whole time, and they wouldn't let go. He wouldn't let go, I even kicked him and he still wouldn't let go. They just shoved me in the closet and shut the door. This time, he's pretty sure Todoroki stopped breathing for a moment. I don't remember what happened most of the time, Izuku says. Sometimes I do, a little, when I wake up from a nightmare or if I'm seconds away from a panic attack. But eventually it goes away again. He pauses to take a deep breath. The weird thing is, the door wasn't locked. It locked from the inside. I should have been able to get out, I think they thought I would. But I just didn't. I didn't get out until the janitor found me at the end of the day, and by then I'd been in there for 3 hours. There were welts and scratches on my face, and everyone said I must have made them myself. My mom says I didn't let her hug me until a couple weeks later, and it took me 8 months to start talking again. He falls silent. It feels as if he's been talking for hours. The first thing Todoroki says in response is this. So is Kaken short for Katsuki? Izuku's heart sinks. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. It makes sense, Todoroki says. His voice is calm, but there's a tension buried deep within it that makes Izuku uneasy. He's your childhood friend. And he's the only person I've ever seen you act afraid of. He pauses, breathing and like he's realized something. You freeze up whenever he grabs you. Can you blame me? Izuku says diddly and sighs. Look, just don't say anything to him, okay? This is all between me and him, and he was 7 years old and selfish and stupid and he didn't know what he was doing. Hell, if you take out the ghosts, that wasn't even the worst thing anyone did to me back then. It was just an unlocked closet, as far as any of them knew it'd be 2 minutes out of my day. It was 8 months, Todoroki says coldly. And you still have nightmares about it. You're still afraid of him. I'm afraid of everything, Izuku hisses. I'm always afraid, all the time. Bakugo's not special, and I'm not gonna feed his ego by acting like he is. He sighs harshly. He's beginning, very, very slowly, to act like less of an asshole than he used to be. If he gets to a point where I think he won't just shrug it off, then yeah, maybe I'll bring it up. But until then, he can do whatever he wants on his own time, as long as he keeps leaving me the hell alone. Gradually, Izuku forces the tension out of his shoulders and lets them slump down. I told you because you asked, and because I trust you. I don't need or want you starting anything over this. But still. Exasperated, Izuku flops back down and nearly brains himself on the floor when he misses the pillow. Todoroki, would you like me to pull a Kuda and punch your dad in the scrotum? Is that what you want? Todoroki snorts and kicks his foot lightly. Of course not, don't be stupid. Then just drop it, okay? Let me deal with my own fraught, tragic childhood, and if I need to punch out my feelings, I'll come to you. Fine, Todoroki fumes and lies down next to him. Did you seriously just use the word fraught? Izuku yanks the comforter back up and half-heartedly tries to smother him with it. See if I ever open my heart to you again. But eventually, when it's silent again but for breathing and Mika's purring, Izuku presses the side of his head to Todoroki's shoulder. Thanks, he murmurs. Really? This kind of means everything to me. Todoroki finds his hand and squeezes it lightly. Izuku falls asleep before he lets go. Shouder wakes up to Midoriya slipping out from under the comforter. He's on his belly, face mashed into the pillow, as Mika walks along his spine and settles between his shoulder blades. Don't get up, it's 5, his friend says quietly. Shouder makes a noise that is, he assumes, appropriately questioning. There's something I have to do, Midoriya says. Well, a couple things. But this one comes first. Don't worry about Mika, I'll be back in time to feed her. Midoriya ruffles his hair lightly. Shouder barely stays awake long enough to hear the door close behind him. Summer's heat still lingers, clinging to the air as the season finally runs its course, but it's early enough to be cool. Tenya made sure to clear things with Aizawa-sensei when he first arrived in the dawns. Curfew restrictions last from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., which leaves him with plenty of time for a morning jog before training. Without his quirk, of course. He stands at the edge of the wooded area surrounding the campus and stretches, breathing in deeply. He's glad the school has areas like this. Not only are there plenty of slopes for light endurance training, but the scenery is pleasant. Running on a track or a treadmill simply can't compare. He finishes his stretches. Morning, Ida. Mind if I join you? Tenya jumps at the sound of Midoriya's voice. Heavens, he doesn't even have his earbuds in yet, and Midoriya still managed to sneak up on him. He has to wonder if that's something he's practiced, or it's a natural talent. Or if it's merely an aspect of his ability. And that leads to other questions, like, did Midoriya already know that Ida runs in the morning, or did he ask? And if he did ask, then who did he? Good morning, Midoriya. Tenya puts on his brightest smile. I don't mind at all. I'd enjoy the company, actually. Only, he frowns. It's awfully early. Have you gotten enough sleep? I've had worse, Midoriya says with a grin, and doesn't seem to realize how worrying that answer is. I jogged in the morning before moving to the dorms, so it's probably good to stay in habit. I'll follow your lead. Tenya leaves his earbuds in his pockets. Just a quick run through the woods. I hope you don't mind slopes. The two of them set off, falling in step with each other easily. I took Belle along on my runs before, Tenya says, because talking and jogging at the same time has never been an issue for him. I wish I could have brought her with me, like you and Kuda did with your animals, but dogs have more direct emotional needs than cats and rabbits, I believe. I wouldn't want to leave her on her own during training or classes. And my mother loves having her around. He carries on, and Midoriya listens attentively and nods along, and even nearly matches his conversation with his own contributions, which bespeaks excellent cardio. And Tenya has missed this. Having company when he jogs. He's found that most people can't carry on a conversation while running, at least not quite as easily, and himself and other people with the right training or the right quirk. It's something he's missed desperately, while simultaneously having no idea who to ask for it, much less how. Talking to Belle is almost as good, but of course, a dog can't answer back. And without her, well, without her, all he can do most days is plug his ears with music and run fast enough for the burn in his muscles to take up all of his attention. But Midoriya's company is fantastic. Almost nothing beats the company of a good friend on a morning run. And Midoriya has some excellent thoughts on quirk theory to share, which certainly doesn't hurt in the least. They stop at the halfway point, for water and to watch the sun finish rising between the trees. Midoriya leans against a length of fencing along the trail, a barrier against a short drop in ground level, and breathes deeply. It's not the first time Tenya has looked at his friend and been tempted to ask, on account of the fact that it's not the first time Tenya has looked at Midoriya. But he holds it in, as always. Midoriya only just started talking again Friday night, and part of Tenya is afraid that one wrong move, one step too far, will send Midoriya back into his shell, back into silence. It's such a stupid thing to be afraid of. He knows Midoriya is strong. He admires Midoriya's strength even more now than he did before he knew the truth. Midoriya saved him from Stain and from himself. Midoriya was caught in the thick of a nighttime battle that Tenya barely even saw. Midoriya fell into the hands of the darkest villains any of them have ever seen and came out swinging. So really, it's not Midoriya he's worried about. It's mostly just himself. Well, we should probably head back, Tenya says. Not yet. Midoriya is still leaning against the fence, staring down at his water bottle as if he expects to offer engaging conversation. Look, Ida, he raises his head, and his eyes flicker to the side and back again. It's not the first time he's seen Midoriya do that. He's seen that since before Kamino. Since before Hoso. Since. There's something you've been wanting to ask me, Midoriya says. Something I've been putting off answering. I'm not sure why. The hard part was already done when I got back, and you already know the part of it that has to do with me, so it's not like there's any turning back. He hops up and sits on the fence post, feet dangling off the ground, and after a moment Tenya goes to sit on the horizontal beam next to him. Midoriya gives him a sad little grin, mouth trembling slightly. I guess I just never felt ready to have this conversation, you know. But sometimes people deserve to know things, whether you're ready to tell them or not. He knocks his heel against the post. But I'm ready now, and the answer's yes. Tenya stops breathing for a moment. Midoriya waits for him to answer, and when he doesn't, he knocks his heels against the post again and continues. Remember when you were worried about him dying? Not just your brother, but the hero and genius. And I told you to take his name, Tenya whispers. So he could live on through me. Yeah, Midoriya says. Well, I didn't come up with that myself. I was just passing along the message. I was scared you'd take it badly, but you didn't. Tenya's chest itches again, and his eyes burn. Why, you know, he says, voice rough from running, of course. I always wondered. That day, when, after the sports festival, when I came in and you were already there, and I was so ready to put on a brave face and keep everyone from worrying. I practiced in the mirror before I left for school. And you took one look at me. No, Midoriya says quietly. It wasn't you I was looking at. Tenya's hand goes to his mouth as if that can keep back the inevitable. Midoriya, he stops, takes a deep breath, and then another and another, until he's reasonably sure his voice won't shake out of control. Is he here? Right now? Tenya's heart clenches with dread, and he almost doesn't want to hear the answer, because what if he's too late? But Midoriya gives him another sad little smile. He never left. The tears come rushing up before Tenya has the chance to breathe. No wonder Midoriya joined him now on a jog through the empty woods long before anyone else has woken up. He would have thought it was to preserve the secret, but maybe it was also to give Tenya some solitude. Midoriya's hand rests on his shoulder, steadying him. Well, that's not quite true, he continues. He left you once, very briefly, in Hoso. And that was just to come find me. I'd like to think I would have gotten to you without him leading the way, but I guess we'll never know. Tenya reaches up and grasps at the hand on his shoulder like a lifeline. He also wants you to know that he leaves often enough to give you an appropriate amount of privacy. He learned his lesson that time you threw a bar of soap at him when you were 6. Tenya laughs in the midst of his tears. Does he stops. Enunai-san, did you know I was trying to miss on purpose? Well, you could have fooled him. For a while Tenya simply sits there, perched on a fence in the woods with his glasses in hand, laughing and crying for the exact same reason while his close friend keeps him from toppling off. It's easily the most ridiculous thing he's done, and it loosens so many of the knots inside of him that he loses count of how many he had to start. When the hysterics start to subside, Tenya wipes his eyes and steadies himself with a few calming breaths. Midoriya's hand doesn't move from its spot. He's proud of you, Midoriya says. You know that, right? You scared him for a little while, and he wishes you hadn't done that, but he also understands, and it didn't make him any less proud. And he wants you to know he's not staying because he's unhappy. He's staying because he doesn't want to miss out on what you're going to become. Midoriya, Tenya rasps. And Tensei. We just stopped for water. If you two don't stop soon, I'm going to end up dehydrated anyway. Sorry. Tenya tugs him into a hug, so suddenly that he almost pulls his friend off the post entirely. He imagines, just for a moment, feeling a different but nonetheless familiar hand on his shoulder, and it's not so very difficult at all.